Welcome everyone to the 8th meeting of the Planning and Environmental Committee. I would like to say that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. So moving along, I would like to go to disclosure of pecuniary interest. I see none. I'd like to go next to the consent items. And I would like to advise the committee that I would like to pull 2.2, which is the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Process Update Report, to have staff speak to it. You will see in front of you a sketch diagram of the LPAT process as well. Are there any other consent items wishing to be pulled? I see none. I would like to put the rest on the floor. Councillor Cassidy, moving it. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconding. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, I did want to speak to the EPAC report, and I noticed there was some good discussion with respect to the Parks and Rec Master Plan. I think it's quite appropriate. They've made a request in there to seek delegation status at the Community and Protective Services Committee rather than coming through to us as well. One of the challenges with the structures of the committee reportings is that it doesn't really necessarily quickly allow an advisory committee to come and speak to the appropriate standing committee if the appropriate standing committee is not the one they normally report to. So there's some good discussion in there about the trail planning and ESAs and how that fits in the whole Parks and Rec versus land management and environmental guidelines. So I look forward to that, and I hope that EPAC will also present their recommendations to us as well here at Planning and Environment Committee, because I think those would be valuable for us in the context of our discussions here.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, for pointing that out. And with that, I would like to go to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, my thanks as well to Councillor Turner for bringing that up. I just also had a question about, is that scheduled to come to the next CAPS committee meeting? Through you to staff.
Mr. Fleming?
Madam Chair, that particular plan, I believe that to be the case, but I don't want to speak for my colleagues. That report is coming from our Parks and Recreation group and not from City Planning. So again, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe in some agenda review meetings that we've had recently that was the schedule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies for springing that on Mr. Fleming. I'll reach out to them in Parks and Rec just to make sure.
Thank you. Moving to 2.2. This is the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Process Update Report. Can we close the vote? Oh.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. I'm just in a bit of a rush here. I do apologize. Moving on to 2.2, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Process Update Report. I would like to go to staff, Mr. Tomazinik and Mr. Fleming, just to speak to this. I do think it is important that we as a committee understand the changes that are going on at LPAT and having a little bit more of a discussion here at committee and hopefully informing the public as well with the changes. This is a process that has been undertaken this past year, and as you can see, we do have a handout that is up on the screen as well, a sketch sort of showing, indicating the process. So, Mr. Fleming, if you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly for the report with respect to the LPAT process and some of those changes. Ms. Wise is here to answer any questions that you might have. It has been a collaborative process between Development Services, City Planning, and Legal, and Ms. Anderson is here as well from Legal. Further to some of the discussions that we've had, we just wanted to point out this simple diagram. It may be instructive in some cases, and it relates to community engagement. As you can see, it's here in this circle, and how that is a contributor, a major contributor, and very important contributor to planning recommendation. But what this diagram points out is that there are many other variables that come together and are synthesized by planning staff through the process, and that includes things like official plan policies and guideline documents that are in our official plan and actually as per the Planning Act must be addressed and all decisions must be consistent with. Same thing goes for provincial policy that exists, including the provincial policy statement. We do receive technical comments from agencies, and those are outside agencies as well as city divisions, and this applies for both planning applications but also for the policy work that we do, the studies that we do, and the recommendations that we come to you with as a result. And then there's planning principles and surrounding context, those things that are in the London Plan, but things that really are the basis for our expertise as planners. So again, it's just making the point that when we go out into the community and there is that community engagement, it's critically important. But it certainly isn't the case that our recommendations are always exactly as the members of the public might ask them to be. In most cases, the community, particularly when we're going into a community and neighborhood, bring very valuable input. In fact, know the neighborhood much better than we would, and we see that as really important input into the process. Same thing goes for policy projects that the community gives us intel, information, and through an engagement process very heavily can shape our planning recommendations. But we also want to make the point that there's much more that's also brought to bear in the recommendations that we bring to you.
Thank you. Mr. Tomazinik.
Madam Chair, the only thing I'll add to that is that as a result of the LPAT, there is a lot more rigor to demonstrate compatibility and consistency with provincial policy and local policy. And so one of the changes that we're intending to propose here is to have the community consultation earlier in the process and formalize it more substantially than it is now, so that by the time it gets to the planning committee, that the neighbors are not only informed of the application, but also how to present their opinion such that it's consistent with the provincial policy and local policy, and allow them the ability to appeal. Whereas right now, for example, you don't have to demonstrate the consistency right at this level. You can do that at the LPAT, but now we need that up front as part of the record.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff. I had heard with the change in government that there may be some changes. I don't know if it's course changes or course reversals, but through you to staff, do you anticipate any further adjustments to the process? So we went from OMB to LPAT. Are you hearing anything from the provincial government?
Mr. Fleming?
Well, Madam Chair, I'll speak from the perspective of some of the work that I've been doing on the Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario. These are people in my position from across the province that come together. We work closely with the administration at the province to talk about legislative changes. And it's always highly speculative, so I would underscore that. My understanding from the discussions I've heard to date is that there will be changes likely to the Planning Act and the provincial policy statement, but I've also heard, and again, this is very informal and it may not be correct, but I have heard some speculation that the LPAT system is something that as a whole would remain in place. Whether there are tweaks to the process in one way or another, I haven't heard anything from that perspective. And again, I'll just highlight that that's what we're anticipating, and we'll see what actually happens.
If I may, I'd just like to go to Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, there's also ongoing litigation. The province is kind of sitting and waiting to hear the result of. Last week, a case was stated to the Divisional Court, and that might provide some direction with respect to specifically some of our recommendations about getting out there early in the process and getting reports up front, and the role of oral evidence and witnesses at future hearings. So we expect some direction to come from the Divisional Court probably in the next couple of weeks. We think we're in line with the current process and where that might go, but we'll see what the court says as well.
Yes, Mayor Holder, welcome.
Thank you. Question, if I could, please, through you to staff. Firstly, compliments on moving the process up to have community input sooner. That just makes a world of sense to me. Just a clarification, if I might, because the LPAT replaces the OMB hearings, and what happens if one side or another, a side that appeals LPAT and they're not satisfied, is there a secondary beyond that, or is that the final step in the process from the perspective of appeal? Can you just clarify that for me, please?
So that process hasn't really significantly changed with the LPAT regime. Decisions are appealable to the Divisional Court on a matter of law. So it's not so much whether or not the appellant likes the finding of the tribunal, but if the tribunal actually commits an error in weighing evidence or analyzing the law, and then there may be an appeal available. So that opportunity is still available. There's also a review process that can occur at the tribunal at their discretion.
At their discretion is fairly broad, so that means even if there was not a ruling against a principle that was found in error, you're saying that they could then determine from there of their own volition a different decision or make some kind of different recommendation. Is that correct?
The tribunal has the ability to review its own decisions, but there aren't any criteria or tests in the legislation that tell us when they may or may not do that.
I see no other questions, so if I could have a mover, Councillor Turner, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And just moving along to our scheduled items, 3.1, we had voted to receive a delegation from the Argyle Business Improvement Area Community Improvement Plan for a CIP, and I just want to know if the delegation is here. I see that the delegation is not here, so I would like to ask the committee if what they would like to do with this delegation. We did say we were going to receive it. we could postpone it to another meeting or note and file. Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, I'd move that we defer this to a subsequent meeting.
And do I have a seconder? Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. The next scheduled item is 3.2. It's a public participation meeting regarding partial rezoning of Scotland Drive and White Oak Road. And I just would like to acknowledge the councillor for the ward, Councillor Elizabeth Close is here, so welcome. Councillor Cassidy. Oh, and seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Welcome, Ms. Lowry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Z8992 is an application for a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by John Arts Group for 3 properties municipally addressed as 3900 Scotland Drive, 3777 Westminster Drive, and 5110 White Oak Road. So this is the aerial imagery of the subject site. As you can see, the 3 properties have frontages on Scotland Drive, Westminster Drive, and White Oak Road. Cumulatively, the site has an area of approximately 56.13 hectares. The site is currently operating as an existing aggregate resource extraction pit, licensed by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And surrounding land uses include aggregate resource extraction and agricultural to the east, agricultural to the south, agricultural, aggregate resource extraction, and White Oak Cemetery to the west, and agricultural to the north. The site is also in proximity to the city's W12A landfill site, which is located on Manning Drive. So the applicant is proposing to rezone a portion of the site, which is currently zoned a resource extraction zone, to a resource extraction 1 zone in order to permit accessory asphalt and concrete batching plants. The image up here on the slide is the conceptual site plan submitted with the application, which shows the approximate location of the proposed plant. As you can see, there's 1 batch plant proposed towards the corner of Westminster Drive, as well as a possible future batch plant number 2 located a little more to the center of the site. So these are photos of the subject site. The first photo on the left is the principal entrance taken from Scotland Drive. The second photo on the right shows the existing aggregate resource extraction operations, which is taken with a view from White Oak Road, from the existing access off of that road. Some more photos of the site. The photo to the left is taken from White Oak Road towards the intersection of Westminster. And the photo on the right is of the northerly portion of the site, approximately where the batch plants are proposed, with the view from Westminster Drive. So in terms of policy, the site is located within the farmland and green space place types of the London Plan, and are designated agriculture, urban, open space rather, and environmental review in the 1989 official plan. As you can see on the photo on the far right, a number of zones currently apply to the site, including an open space OS4 zone, environmental review zone, and of course the existing resource extraction EX zone. So the requested amendment, originally the applicant had requested to rezone a portion of the site from EX to EX1. The requested EX1 zone would therefore permit the accessory asphalt and concrete batching plants. And the zone boundary was proposed outside a 50-meter environmental setback from the wooded environmental features on the site. Now, through the process, the applicant amended their request such that the 50-meter environmental setback would be measured from the limit of the extraction approved on the MNRF operational plan rather than the drip line of the treat area. So that affected this wooded area here towards White Oak Road, in that the zone boundary would be closer to the feature rather than further away. Staff was not supportive of this amended request, and as such, the applicant reverted back to the original request with the 50-meter environmental setback measured from the drip line. In terms of provincial policy, the provincial policy statement provides policies permitting planning authorities to permit non-agricultural uses in prime agricultural areas for the extraction of minerals, petroleum resources, and mineral aggregate resources. In prime agricultural areas on prime agricultural land, mineral aggregate resources, extraction of mineral aggregate resources is a permitted interim use provided that the site will be rehabilitated back to an agricultural condition. In the PPS, the definition of mineral aggregate operations also includes associated facilities, including the recycling of mineral aggregate resources and derived products such as asphalt and concrete, or the production of secondary related products. The PPS also states that mineral aggregate resources shall be protected for long-term use, and existing mineral aggregate operations shall be permitted to continue without the need for an OPA, rezoning, or development permit. And mineral aggregate resource conservation shall also be undertaken, including through the use of accessory aggregate recycling facilities within operations. So through this policy, staff is satisfied that the requested amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement. The London Plan, Map 6 of the London Plan, which is hazards and natural resources, identifies the extractive industrial areas in the city. Now, it should be noted that this site is not included on that map as an extractive industrial areas. However, it is recognized that that is a mapping error and will be rectified. The primary permitted uses of the farmland place type are agricultural. However, natural resource extraction and existing uses are also recognized. And the objectives of the natural resource policies of the London Plan are to promote aggregate resource conservation, including extraction and recovering of manufactured materials derived from aggregates, and to provide for the continued operation of existing resource extractive operations. Aggregate extraction is a permitted interim use in all place types of the London Plan. And in prime agricultural areas, aggregate extraction sites are to be rehabilitated to an agricultural condition. And lastly, in addition to aggregate resource extraction, the recovery and recycling of manufactured materials derived from aggregates is also permitted. So all in all, staff is satisfied the requested amendment is in conformity with the London Plan. And lastly, the site is identified as extractive industrial on Schedule B2, Natural Resources and Hazards, in the 1989 official plan. The majority of the site is designated agricultural, and this designation recognizes legally existing aggregate resource uses as permitted uses. The aggregate resource policies of the 1989 official plan state that legally existing pits and quarries are a permitted use by the plan. And on sites designated extractive industrial, aggregate extraction is a permitted interim use in all land use designations. So all in all, staff is satisfied that the requested amendment is in conformity with the 1989 official plan. So through the circulation of the application, a number of concerns were raised by the public with respect to the number of trucks entering and exiting the site. It should be noted that Scotland Drive, Westminster Drive, and White Oak Road are all identified as rural connectors on Map 3 of the London Plan and are arterial roads on Schedule C of the 1989 official plan. Appropriate site access and design will be refined at the site plan approval stage to ensure safety, and this will include road widening dedications and turn lanes to support the heavy vehicle movements in and out of the site. Furthermore, raw materials required to produce the concrete will be available on site, and it's anticipated that a portion of the annual sand and gravel sales will be diverted to the on-site batching plant. Therefore, fewer trucks will be leaving the site. And lastly, a holding provision is recommended, which will ensure a geotechnical report and any necessary road upgrades are completed. In addition to the traffic concerns, there were some concerns raised regarding potential environmental impacts as a result of the proposed asphalt and concrete batching plants. City Parks Planning and Design staff, as well as EPAC and the UTRCA, had no concerns, provided the 50-meter environmental setback was provided from the environmental features on site. Furthermore, a hydrogeological study was completed as part of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry licensing process, and regular hydrogeological monitoring is required as part of the continued operation of the resource extraction pit. And lastly, notes on the approved MNRF operational plan provide for specific hydrogeological requirements that must be complied with, as well as mitigation measures for noise, dust, and groundwater interference. So in conclusion, staff is satisfied that the requested amendment is consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement and is in conformity with the policies of the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. The requested amendment will permit an accessory use that is complementary to the existing aggregate resource extraction operations. And as such, it is recommended that the requested amendment be approved with a holding provision requiring the owner to undertake a geotechnical study and any necessary road upgrades. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. Any technical questions from the committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really quickly, just for confirmation, I think as I read through it, the ecological feature is a significant woodland. It doesn't contain any provincially significant wetlands or anything like that.
Through you, Madam Chair, no, it does not.
I see no other technical questions of staff. I would like to go to the applicant, if the applicant is here. Welcome, sir. If you could state your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Priamo. I'm here on behalf of the applicants in this project. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak to the committee. I'm not going to do a presentation, lengthy presentation. Staff has done a thorough job in identifying all of the issues as they apply to the site, and we're certainly in support of the recommendation. I just wanted to turn the committee's attention to one matter dealing with the draft zoning that has been attached to the report for consideration. Staff have prepared the zoning appropriately, but they're proposing a holding provision dealing with a geotechnical study of the surrounding road areas. And we're on a pretty aggressive timeline with this project. We've already filed for site plan pre-consultation, and we have a list of issues that were raised through that process that we're working through. And in that process, we were hoping to submit to staff a submission that the study, as suggested in the pre-con conditions, isn't required. And that we can address those issues through the site plan approval process without that study. Principally, as indicated in the staff report, the property is currently licensed for a gravel extraction operation that is licensed for a certain number of truck movements annually. And even with these new operations and the scope of the operation on the site right now, we're not approaching the permitted limits of trips generated from this site. And so, first of all, we don't think it needs to be handled by a holding provision. I think it can be adequately addressed through the site plan approval process. And that would be our preferred option. All we're really doing here is preserving the right to make our submissions to staff and see if we can convince them that that study is, unnecessary. But not, if ultimately that's the determination, that's the determination. I did provide as an alternative to staff just a minor rewording of the holding provision that would leave open the option for staff to determine that the study isn't required. It still means we have to come back and remove the H at some point in the future, which can sometimes be problematic when you're trying to move a project through quickly. But if it satisfies the concerns of the traffic division as an alternative, while not our preference, we would be open to, as I say, a minor rewording of the holding provision to accommodate the option because the way the holding provision is written right now, it assumes the study will be done. And if for some reason we were able to convince staff that it didn't need to be done, we would still need to address it as a result of the way the holding provision is written. I did provide staff with a draft wording if it pleases the committee to consider that. Other than that, we're excited to proceed with this project, and we'd certainly be happy to answer any questions the committee might have or any questions arising from the balance of the public participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Priamo. Any technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps through you to Ms. Lowry, with respect to Mr. Priamo's question about the necessity of the geotechnical analysis, if you might be able to comment on that.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the transportation staff asked for the geotechnical study basically in relation to Schedule 15 of the traffic and parking bylaw, which it states that there's reduced limits are in effect for these roads, including Westminster Drive, White Oak Road, and Scotland Drive. The way this is written right now, that the highway sit in column 1, which is in this Schedule 15, it says that the limits are restricted to reduced load of a maximum weight of 5 tons per axle for any vehicle traveling on these highways from March 1st to April 30th. So staff has already determined that a geotechnical study is needed because this heavy vehicles are not allowed on this road right now, and that's why we need the geotechnical study.
Thank you. Any other technical questions? I see none. I therefore would like to go to the gallery, and I'll start here on my left side. We have 2 microphones on each side of the gallery. Please come forward, stating your name and address if you like, and you do have 5 minutes. Mr. Brown.
Gary Brown, 59 Rideout Street South, 35A. Wasn't going to speak on this, but I'm a bit of an aggregate buff, so some things need to be said. I've had an entire discussion about an aggregate extraction industry without anybody mentioning the word water. It's an extremely water-intensive use. The record of, the safety of groundwater and surface water is not that good in the aggregate extraction business. I'd just like some reassurances from staff that this has been looked into. You guys just declared a climate emergency, yet we're talking about widening roads and more trucks and gravity extraction, a lot of water, which takes a lot of energy to purify. Just wondering how we reconcile those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. I'll go to the center. Yes. Please state your name and address if you choose. Welcome.
My name's Cam Tilley. I live at 3043 Westminster Drive.
If you can just lift the microphone a little bit closer so we can hear you. Hopefully it's on.
Cam Tilley, 3043 Westminster Drive. My concern is the trucks. The speaker for the company a few minutes ago said they hadn't even come close to using up the amount they're allowed. 1 every 4 minutes last spring, summer, fall, into the winter. I would say that's far more than the limited amount. Also, if you're going to allow trucks in, there's 4 houses or 4 residences on Scotland, and there's no traffic there. Westminster Drive has roughly 100 residents and is becoming a racetrack for motorcycles and a racetrack for dump trucks. The dump trucks are not the quality that you see on the 401. The dump trucks that they use will be stuff that they have used up on the highway work and now barely pass safeties. If they were going down to Putnam, they'd be pulled in. The brakes lock up when they're hitting the brakes. Oil is all over the road. Plus, it's just not safe. And we live in a residential area. And they should be diverted to a different area. I noticed on your workup, the ministry said that they wanted to do a check on the new bridge for going over it. I would suspect that what the traffic underneath does more damage to the bridge than anything going over it. The vibrations all day long from the 401 and 402 are far more destructive than the amount of a truck going over. That's all.
Thank you. And I see another gentleman there. Please come to the microphone, stating your name and address if you wish.
Hi, my name is Rob McNeil, 340 Colborne Street in London. Thank you for the chance to speak. I hope everyone's feeling well. Welcome to the era of climate emergency, as someone already said, declared by Council last week. My hope is that Council will move to a fuller evaluation of projects proposed rather than just a narrow rezoning focus. Water, power, emissions, runoff, these should all be spelled out clearly in the information provided to the committee and weighed carefully. I didn't see any really useful data in the proposal information supplied. How quickly will these plants be running and belching toxic chemicals, and how much? What market is it going to serve? Is it intended for the proposed Maple Leaf plant where John Arts Group is doing the earthworks? Currently, that proposal is subject to both an environmental appeal attempt and a corporate campaign by the Stop Maple Leaf Violence group on Facebook. Go to the Facebook page. I would caution any company looking at working there to be wary of investing too much time or money in preparing to supply them. There's significant speciesist, environmental, archaeological, human rights and approval issues to be addressed. Companies that contract with Maple Leaf and suppliers and investors to those companies risk becoming embroiled in delays and becoming targeted themselves. The Maple Leaf lands were rezoned in secret without full information being provided to Council. Please don't let that mistake keep being repeated. I'd like to know what these plants are designed for. But specifically on this proposal, concrete and asphalt batching plants can be very large or very small. They shouldn't be in floodplains, and they can be very smelly and toxic. What I read in the document was that OMAFRA in particular suggested there might be need for an official plan amendment and that enough analysis has not been provided. The staff response I saw was that the concerns identified above have been clarified and addressed, but I didn't see what the answers were. Can we know what those answers were? I echo those concerns. There just isn't enough information here on what's being planned. My ask is that committee refer this proposal back to staff to gather more information on 7 areas, and I can email or provide copies of this. The estimated water, energy and emissions from each plant, the estimated odor and noise zone, the quantity of runoff and waste generated and the plans for dealing with that, the hours of operation and the expected opening date, clarification over OMAFRA's concerns, whether these plants will be subject to Ministry of Environment applications, and the size, capacity and purpose of each plant. Is there a shortage of supply in London, or is this just more intensive resource extraction masked as capitalism ruining the future for our children? The world is changing. We're under a climate emergency, and we can't keep adding more toxic concrete and asphalt plants without close scrutiny of the resources required and the impact on our planet and the community. Please provide this information to neighbours and to concerned residents and schedule a future participation meeting if you decide to go forward. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. And if I can ask if the clerk can come up and take your submission. She'll be up in a few minutes. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this application? Please come forward to the microphones. I see no one else. I would like to have a motion, therefore, to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And if I may ask the committee, I would like to just go to staff to address some of the questions that were addressed. Water was one, the concerns around the water. The other one, the bridge. And the third one I had down was the OP amendment from OMAFRA, the comments.
Through you, Madam Chair, in terms of water quality and hydrology, that issue is addressed at the provincial level through the licensing of the mineral aggregate extraction pit. That license required an initial hydrogeological study, and continued water monitoring is a requirement of that license. In terms of the OMAFRA comments, we had received comments late in the process from the province, which initially cited concerns. It was clarified that the requested amendment would not permit a standalone asphalt or concrete batching plant, but rather accessory to the existing operation. So the the requested zoning would only allow that use so long as the resource extraction operations are licensed and existing on site. Following closure of the pit, the applicant is required to rehabilitate back to the intended land use of the official plan, which is agricultural. And the last question.
I think there was a question about the bridge.
That I will defer to my colleagues in transportation.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. So with respect to the bridge, it's under the control of the Ministry of Transportation, MTO. So the city has no control on it. We cannot really comment on it. We don't have any information.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the committee. Any questions, comments? Maybe I'll ask the councillor of the ward. Welcome, Councillor Perloza.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me and your time beforehand to know that I would have a list of questions. Hopefully this addresses some concerns I've heard from my residents in Ward 12 as they've been calling and emailing in. I was driving around the site this morning, as I had already done a month previous, and I did have some questions through you to staff. There's a list of questions in full disclosure. Looking for staff clarification if they can shed any light on page 88, when the UTCA raised some concerns of encroachment on the environmental setback. They were looking for an explanation and wondering if you had any explanation on the encroachments that's happened on areas that's been already set aside.
Through you, Madam Chair, the comments on page 88 of the staff report from the UTRCA were in response to the amended request, which between staff concerns and the concerns of the UTRCA ultimately resulted in the applicant reverting back to the original request.
Thank you for that. And in regards to page 70, in regards to the berm construction at the front end of the project, was hoping for there to be a provision set in with the application to let the UTCA discuss the plans beforehand, understanding that a berm could displace some water runoff and some other considerations in that area was a concern for myself. In regards to the road upgrades on page 73, wondering for clarification if we're talking about some road widening and turning lanes, if it would be the city's responsibility to pay for any of those upgrades or the applicants.
So we have two, one on the berm concerns about the berm, and then the responsibility of, I guess, the roadworks.
Madam Chair, the berm is something that we discussed as recently as this morning with the UTRCA, so it is both on our radar and theirs as well. And through the subsequent site plan process, should council choose to support this application, it'll be dealt with through my colleagues in site plan.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. So there is no really widening to the entire road is required. However, staff has asked for a right turn lane and a left turn lane at the axis, the main axis to the plant. And also we have asked that the other axis to the north to be closed.
And if I may, just following up on that would be addressed through the holding provision or not?
Through you, Madam Chair, that'd be addressed through the site plan development agreement with special provisions that be inserted. And just to clarify for Councillor Pelosa's question, the cost would be borne by the applicant for the road upgrades.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the clarification, and my questions are drawing to a close, but in regards to current site features of aggregate reprocessing, wondering if the site currently takes part in that, or if it's part of their future plans, and seeing how it would affect that they, as they're discussing how many truckloads are outbound, wondering what trucks they have that are currently inbound with product for them.
Madam Chair, I believe that's probably a question that the applicant can answer better than staff could.
Mr. Priamo, so the reprocessing of, I guess, the asphalt at the plant, and then also the truckloads, the amount of trucks coming in and out?
I apologize, Madam Chairman. I don't have exact numbers. The numbers that we did provide with our application is in the staff report. We are doing concrete recycling on that property now. So the traffic that is currently being generated already takes into consideration the fact that concrete is being crushed and returned to aggregate, essentially for either road rebuilding or as a product part of concrete. So that's ongoing as it stands right now.
And if I could have clarification, if I may, that it's just concrete, not concrete and asphalt?
The proposal would allow for concrete and an asphalt batching plant.
Thank you.
And thank you to the appropriate staff or the applicant. What is the current life expectancy of extraction left on this site?
I assume this is addressed to the applicant.
The current licensed resource is still significant. There's still millions of tons of aggregate available within that aggregate operation. So it's probably a decade's or more supply of aggregate depending on market conditions.
Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the answer of that, as that flowed into page 91 of a concern that was already raised of that once these, if approved, these asphalt and concrete plants would not be in an interim use, and it would be requiring an official plan amendment. Also wondering, since it's just extraction currently, what kind of hydro upgrades, if there's any concerns with those for the sites, of what would be required to make a plant function and what would need to be done out there?
Again, we've just sort of initiated the site plan approval process, did the pre-consultation as we used the time while we were waiting for this matter to come before the committee. The applicant's due diligence and early indications are that there's ample supply of power to operate the plants at this location, and we don't expect any extraordinary improvements to the hydro service in this area. And if there were, sorry, Madam, if there were, it would be at our cost.
Thank you for the clarification, and certainly to my fellow councillors. Just hearing from residents a lot of concern with the truck traffic they already have, and certainly when a gentleman's saying a truck goes by every 4 minutes versus the almost 28,000, which is certainly well within their numbers of what's being claimed, of just our road conditions and the quality and enjoyment of their property, in regards to other things that were noted in the report in regards to asphalt and some concerns of residents raised over potential carcinogens, and just raising the note that there are 2 petitions that came in from residents in regards to the application, one opposing it and one regards to the truck traffic. So certainly asking staff, or as you go forward considering this, if it is possible to have Westminster being no truck traffic and it diverted based on how many residents are actually using those driveways, and residents cited they're just trying to, there's no sidewalks and they're still out walking their dog trying to enjoy their neighborhood, and they can't do that safely in their opinion with these trucks going by at rapid rates. And that concludes all my questions and comments.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosa. Before I go back to the committee, you mentioned that you've got 2 petitions. We have not received them, so if you could pass them on to the clerk, I think it would be important. And I'll go to the committee now. Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I just want to raise a couple of points. The first is the applicants asked for some kind of amendment, and I just want to be clear that I saw that for the first time by an email that was sent at 3:15 that I got after the committee meeting actually started. And that's just not enough time for me to consider something like that. And in the future, I think if you're going to be coming here to the planning committee, it's going to be really helpful to have something here for us that I would have a chance to look at. And given that staff has not agreed to that amendment, I don't see how I can agree to it on that short a time period. I don't think that's fair to the committee to ask them to consider that. The second issue is, and it's been raised by Councillor Pelosa, I'm not aware of, I came to this meeting without the information that we're getting now about residents being upset, petitions. I don't know anything about any of that. And again, I find it really difficult to have a matter that staff recommended and then all of a sudden we're hearing other information. So I just think it puts us in a really difficult spot when we're being asked to approve or not approve, to make it up on the fly based on information that we're getting. So that's my comment at this point in time, that it either goes back or it gets approved or denied. And I just don't think this is a way to do this, is to have last minute information being flung at the committee that we have absolutely no chance to properly consider.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. And before I go to the mayor, I wonder if I could go to Mr. Thomas Zinnick. I did notice you wanted to make a comment.
The only thing I just wanted to mention was regarding the hydro. As a matter of course, we do circulate London Hydro all our applications, and we received no comments on this one.
Thank you for clarifying that. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the work done by staff, and I'm comfortable with the staff's recommendation, less so with the applicant's revision to that for the reasons that Councillor Squire mentioned. And I would encourage anyone who has views either to the contrary or to amendments of anything that they do that with sufficient time. I'm certainly not here to lecture anyone in the crowd, but it would just, or anyone listening, but it would just be helpful for a committee to be able to have that in advance for its consideration.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, perhaps to Mr. Almadoun, in terms of the redesignation of some of the roads to be further restrictive, I wonder if you could talk about the trade-offs that's involved in that. Obviously, if there's a lot of trucks traveling on several roads, that's more distributed than all the trucks going on fewer roads. And I imagine that's harder on the road surface itself over time. It would affect the life cycle. I just wonder if you could speak to how you decide about designating roads as for trucks or not for trucks.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So most of these roads are arterials, as mentioned earlier, based on the current official plan, and they are rural connectors. The traffic volume on these roads are not large, so it's not a matter of how many trips will be produced. And I mean, they have already a lot of spare capacity. It's the load itself, and as I said, it's 5 tons per axle. Now, I really don't have much background information when these truck roads were assigned, but I know that most of these arterials are truck routes. Only a few of them are restricted during specific time. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, or you're looking for a different, or if maybe I need more clarification in order to answer.
No, I think that's helpful. I think partly because people are interested in this issue, it's helpful to explain why, there are restrictions on certain times of year. I think sometimes we assume that people understand how roads are put together and why you'd want to restrict it during a certain period of time when there's freezing and thawing happening. And I just wonder maybe if you could address that part where there's a restriction for a certain time of the year and not for the rest. I just wonder if you could talk about that.
Okay, so again, as I noted that there are few roads that are restricted, for example, from after 6 p.m. And that's some of these roads when there are residential areas or commercial. That's why, for example, like Hyde Park Road, it would be restricted. It's not a 24-hour routes, truck routes. But these type of roads are already in a farm area that you do have truck traffic and others traffic that need to have access to these properties all the time of the day.
And if I may, just following up on that, does that mean all year round as well? That the trucks would be there year round, not just seasonal?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions from the committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, I appreciate the comments with respect to environmental impacts on this site. Was one of the questions I asked right at the outset was what the environmental feature itself was. We have the environmental management guidelines, which actually delineate the kind of the trigger distances for required studies, environmental impact studies, the like that. Provincially significant wetlands have a larger radius than significant woodland. The 50-meter requirement is what I was looking for in there to make sure that any of the offsets were appropriate. And as staff had identified, and in consultation with the Upper Thames, the amended application was withdrawn to go back to the original application to respect those limits. The aggregate extraction is an activity that's currently happening at the site. So all the Ministry of Natural Resources requirements that are required for aggregate extraction are in place and I'd imagine closely monitored by the ministry as well. So in those circumstances, I mean, really what we're looking for is a zoning amendment and not really taking a look beyond our purview of what we're able to do and say whether that's an appropriate activity or not in terms of its environmental impact. We know from our environmental management guidelines, that's what we have to be able to work with. We can't really work contrary to those, and if we were to make decisions contrary to those, then obviously it would be assailable at the tribunal. But it would also mean that we should be going back and taking a look at our environmental management guidelines and seeing if those are appropriate and appropriately delineated. So in this circumstance, I think the report is quite thorough from staff, and I appreciate that. And I think it gives us a fairly clear picture of the direction that we go from here.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Cassidy? No. So I guess I am looking for a motion then to approve the zoning amendment with a holding provision as noted in the staff's recommendation. Mayor Holder making the motion. Councillor Turner? Seconding?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And just to let the community know, the recommendation has been supported with the holding provision. Moving on to 3.3, which is the public participation meeting on Victoria Park Secondary Plan. This is an update and a draft secondary plan principles. Just if I can have a motion from the committee opening up the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner. Seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Welcome, Mrs. Canarian.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, excellent. So thanks very much. So I'm here with the status update and draft secondary plan principles for the Victoria Park secondary plan. So this is a process that we've undergone that's involved a lot of involvement from the community, and sort of we thought it was important to give PEC and council an update and discuss seek endorsement for some draft principles to form the foundation of the development of the secondary plan. So back in 2015, we had an application submitted for initially a 25-story tower that was revised, then later revised to a 22-story tower at 560 to 562 Wellington Street. So this application went to Planning Committee back in May of 2017, and at which time staff recommended refusal of the application, but then Council referred the application back to the Civic Administration in order to continue to work with the applicant to submit a revised proposal that's more compatible with the surrounding context, with consideration for the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District, the official plan, and the London plan. So then from there, staff went back and we continued to work with the applicant, and then in May of 2018 provided an update on discussions to Council, saying essentially that more work was required, and then Council directed staff to undertake a review of the existing plans, policies, and guidelines applying to the properties surrounding Victoria Park, and to consider a comprehensive plan for the properties surrounding the park. Because despite the fact that we have a number of policy documents applying to those properties, there's nothing that's ever considered those properties holistically based on their relationship to the park. So then we moved forward and we retained Urban Strategies as our consultant to work with us on the secondary plan. They're an internationally renowned planning firm that's done work on several international municipalities along with municipalities in Ontario. And then we've had some community consultation meetings. So the existing policy framework is surrounding the park. It's very varied. We've got the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan applying to the properties on the south. We have the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District Plan applying to the properties on the east and the west. We have several properties that are listed on the city's heritage inventory of heritage resources. We've got the Downtown Design Guidelines, the Woodfield Neighborhood Specific Policy Area, and London's Downtown Plan. On top of that, we also have the official plan policies, the London plan policies, and also the zoning bylaw. So none of these have considered the properties around the park comprehensively based on their relationship to the park. So this is our opportunity to do this and sort of fill this gap that we've identified in the policies. So the study area is that this secondary plan is looking at is all properties with frontage on Victoria Park and properties that based on their ownership could be anticipated to be sort of considered together. We're terming this the Victoria Park Precinct. Generally, it's anticipated that many policies in the plan will apply to the whole study area, but each of the sides are unique, so there may be policies that apply to each of the sides specifically. It is worth noting that we have and will be continuing to consider the broader context and the impacts, but the policies will be specific to the properties in the study area. So we have had an extensive community consultation process. Our first community information meeting was held at the start of October at Central Library. We had about 40 people. At that meeting, the consultant presented the draft key opportunities and considerations to seek and sought feedback on them. They included responding to transit, how the Clarence Street would interface with Victoria Park, identifying what are appropriate height transitions, looking at shadow impacts, looking to enhance key views of the park, and looking to rethink the relationship between Victoria Park and Richmond Street, and looking to continue to enhance the gateways. We heard a lot of comments. There were very diverse views on what heights were appropriate around the park, but we did hear sort of some comments that were somewhat universal, including desires for increased connectivity and greening, the conservation of heritage resources, And there were also questions about sort of how does this relate to parks in other cities, and what would different heights look like? So from there, we had our second community information meeting back in January of this year. It was attended by approximately 120 people. So we've definitely been picking up feedback as the study moves along. So at this meeting, staff gave a presentation, as did the consultant, where we talked about the study to date, next steps, and the consultant also brought, in response to the previous meeting, examples of other parks, both within North America and Europe, and different built forms around those parks, and also presented 3 massing model scenarios just to give people the opportunity to see what different heights around the park could look like and comment on those, just because they'd identified we wanted to see what these look like, so we gave them those to respond to. From there, we also, the consultant presented some draft principles to form the foundation of the secondary plan, and we heard feedback on those principles. Feedback we heard included we continued to have a wide range of comments about what heights would be appropriate around the park. We heard the desire for increased connectivity, protecting the environmental health of the park, supporting transit, concerns about traffic, the desire for high quality design, compatibility with heritage, parking, greening, and concern about festival noise. We've also had other opportunities for engagement. We've had over 150 interested parties in the study. And you can see here from this heat map, yes, we've had a lot of comments from within Woodfield and the downtown, but we've also had comments throughout London on this study. So it's been a very sort of citywide issue, just because everyone universally has come to us and said, this is such an important civic asset. And they seem very interested in it. So we've had stakeholder meetings with a number of people who've requested them, including the Friends of Victoria Park and numerous surrounding landowners. We have a Get Involved website, and we also attended some select summer festivals. So we're coming to you today with some draft secondary plan principles. These are meant to sort of form the foundation of the secondary plan, and we developed them with the consultant. We've also hired a heritage consultant who will provide a peer review of the draft secondary plan, just because what we've heard is so much about how important this heritage is, so we want to make sure we're getting it right. So the first principle is looking at opening up view corridors to the park, both existing and new view corridors. So you're seeing a visual connection that's being sought to add from Kent Street to the park. The other corridors are existing, and we've also heard some feedback about wanting to add additional view corridors from the park to St. Peter's Basilica, because we've heard just how important that is as a resource. Another principle is improving and creating new connections to the park. So these would be done if in the future there was some redevelopment, looking at these pedestrian connections. So you could either have a new road, you could have a pedestrian connection that was exclusively for pedestrians, or you could even have a pedestrian connection through a building. But what we did here is the desire for that enhanced connectivity, both from Kent Street and from Princess Avenue. And just enhancing the existing connections also. Okay, we also heard a lot about the desire for the greening of this park just to spill over into adjacent neighborhoods. Due to the existing building setbacks, this would likely mostly happen in the public right-of-way, but we did hear a lot about the comments about the importance of the greening of the park. The fourth draft principle is respecting and conserving heritage resources, because we've got the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District, the Downtown Heritage Conservation District, along with a number of properties in that block to the north that are listed on the city's heritage register. So we've engaged a heritage consultant, and they will be reviewing the draft secondary plan to ensure that it's supportive of the heritage context. Another principle is framing the park with appropriately scaled podiums. So if you look around the park, there's several buildings that have sort of similar roof lines, all of about 4 to 5 stories. So the desire that having appropriately scaled podiums will help to enhance the pedestrian realm for those in the park. Another is identifying opportunities for intensification. This is what we've heard the most diverse viewpoints on. But generally right now what we're looking at is having the highest heights along in the downtown and along Richmond Street, and then transitioning towards the low-rise Woodfield area. Also looking to minimize shadow and looking at that heritage compatibility that the heritage consultant will look at too. Another is protecting the residential amenity of the Woodfield neighborhood. We heard a lot about this low-rise neighborhood and how it's important character and really protecting that amenity within that neighborhood, looking at such impacts as privacy, overlook, shadow. Another is looking to ensure active uses on the ground floor that support and animate the park. We still want to recognize the need of the retail primacy along Richmond Street, but looking at select locations where it's good to sort of have that pedestrian animation. And also there were concerns about parking. There was the universal element that was noted that if there's intensification around the park, there needs to be more parking, but where do you put this parking? And I'm looking at ways so that it won't compromise the pedestrian environment. Principle number 9 is design buildings to celebrate the prominence of Victoria Park. That was another thing that we heard so universally, is how important and cherished Victoria Park was as a resource. And the idea that because it's so important, it should demonstrate design excellence to really celebrate the importance of that location. The next principle is to continue to enhance the amenity of Victoria Park. So we heard a lot of concerns about if more residents are moving in, then concerns about sort of the physical landscape, the grass deteriorating, impacts of wind, impacts of the noise. Even though I know it's intended that many of our festivals will move to Dundas Place, there's still this idea that some festivals would operate in Victoria Park, and concerns about the noise from those festivals. So the policies would look to be addressing that. So in terms of next steps, we're developing the secondary plan, but we thought it was really important to come here and sort of get endorsement for our draft principles just to really form that foundation so that we can move forward with developing with the policies for the draft secondary plan. That'll then be reviewed by a heritage consultant, and then sort of depending on how everything goes, we're targeting bringing the draft secondary plan to Planning and Environment Committee in late June or potentially September, depending on the feedback we receive. And then that would sort of open up the engagement and consultation on that draft secondary plan, and then we'd move into having the final secondary plan being considered in the fall. And so today we're here seeking endorsement for the draft secondary plan principles. It being noted that staff will continue to work with the consultants, stakeholders, property owners, and other interested parties to develop the secondary plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Technical questions, Councillor Turner, Councillor Squire.
That's all good now. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just a really quick question, and perhaps I missed it in the report. I was looking for it as I read through it, but what happens when two secondary plans overlap? We've got the West Woodfield secondary plan, which currently exists, and the terms of reference and incorporation of this kind of lays over top of that West Woodfield. So you'd have potentially two competing secondary plans depending on what the outcome of the secondary plan was.
Okay, so through you, Madam Chair, there isn't a secondary plan right now for Woodfield. We have a Heritage Conservation District plan for West Woodfield, so we're not proposing to amend that. That really considers those heritage resources, and it would still continue to apply, and its policies would still continue to apply and wouldn't be in conflict with a secondary plan. Then there also is a Woodfield neighborhood-specific policy area. So we would be looking at that through the secondary plan. I mean, if amendments did need to be made to that, they would also be made through this process.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. Thanks for the correction too.
Councillor Squire.
This may seem like a really obvious question, but I want you to answer it anyways. We're not here tonight to determine and debate what the secondary plan is going to look like. We're just going to talk about some of the principles that you've generated for the actual creation of the report. Am I right?
Mr. Fleming?
Madam Chair, that's correct. And I just wanted to dive in because I wanted to say that this is a little bit different than some of our other processes. We'll often come forward with the draft plan, but there are some circumstances where we don't. And that's where issues emerge through the process that we feel we'd like to check in with council just to see if we're headed in the right direction. And I'll give an example of that recently, which was relating to the Old East Village secondary plan and the streetscape and how we were dealing with the cycling lanes. And so there's a check-in process there. Similarly here, we know how important this is, trying to balance the residential amenity, the opportunities for intensification, how we transition from downtown into a low-rise residential area. So that's why we're bringing exactly that, these principles, so that we can get a sense from council, are we headed in the right direction? But I want to be clear that there will be a draft plan coming forward in the future. There will be another engagement process around that, opportunity for everyone to check in with something more concrete beyond principles. And then finally, for your decision, following that, a final plan. And again, the public will have the opportunity to make delegation at that final meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I hope it frames a conversation we're going to have, that people aren't getting to the end point of saying, here's what we want in the final plan, and telling us that tonight when we're not even sort of close to being there. So thank you for that. The second question is, and maybe a little more challenging, and it has to do with the some of the principles, because it's very difficult for me to understand exactly what the principles mean. And the one that interests me is, it says the greatest heights for properties surrounding the park are contemplated for properties in the downtown and fronting on Richmond Row, transitioning downward towards the Woodfield neighborhood. I understand the principle, but is there any way to tell me or help me with the idea of, let me give you an example. Let's say you decide you want 5-story buildings on Richmond Street. Does that automatically mean everything on the other side has to be less? So I guess what I'm saying is, technically, how do I make a judgment on this principle when I don't know what the heights are you're talking about?
So through you, Madam Chair, so the principles themselves are, would be that the secondary plan would look at identifying opportunities for intensification. Just because this process has been so involved, we're looking for, we thought it would be good to come with an opportunity and sort of give some of our preliminary thoughts, not seeking endorsements of those preliminary thoughts, but just giving something that should council wish to provide comments that we can utilize in the preparation of our draft secondary plan, just sort of almost as a status update check-in. The overall principle is identifying opportunities for intensification, and then we just thought it may be good to give you a heads up about where we're going with it.
If I could, Madam Chair, I'll just augment that by saying that, for example, going from south to north, if you look at the lands to the east side of Wellington, right now there's the City Hall site, which would be within the downtown area place type or designation. And so that does support currently towers. As we go north from there, what we're suggesting as a principle is we'd step down as we go north from there towards the lower rise residential neighborhood. Similarly, along Richmond Street, there is a Main Street place type and a rapid transit corridor. In fact, actually it's a rapid transit corridor with a Main Street policy within it, which allows, again, for higher rise forms of development. That's on the west side of the park. And as you went further east and north, the principle would be going from those high rise forms into the mid and low rise forms. I'll just repeat what I said before. You'll see how that manifests itself in more detail when we bring forward the draft secondary plan. So it's understood that we don't know exactly what the level of that intensity and height would be at this point. We certainly have some ideas that we're formulating, but just as a principle to understand that that makes sense as we go north and east and you get closer to the Woodfield neighborhood, that we do what we can to reduce those heights.
And if I may, Councillor Squire, to interrupt, Mr. Fleming, I hear you say then the plans will be coming forward on how these buildings are going to look like in the draft secondary plan coming in June to planning.
So we'd be bringing forward what I would suggest 3 different aspects. It will show how the heights of the buildings, so the intensity would work going from north to south and west to east. It'll show the range of uses. So for example, the integration of commercial or other uses, and the form, which is what I think a lot of people are interested in as well, and that is the design qualities. And so we would have design guidelines or requirements, policies relating to those buildings to ensure that it's of a quality from a design perspective and meeting those design principles onto the park, and also mitigating impact adjacent on the surrounding residential neighborhood.
Councillor Squire, does that help you?
No, but I'll proceed. Sorry, I was just being honest. Just so I understand then, if you have your principles and they're approved and you come back, this is important to me and it's technical because I'm looking at decision making. If you develop your principles and I say, I like your principles, but then you come back and I say, I hate how you've applied your principles and I don't agree with it, is somebody going to have a problem with that? I'd say, hey, you agreed to these principles and they're binding on you.
So through you, Madam Chair, no, this is just looking at sort of the guiding principles, and then the specifics are, in terms of how they're actually implemented, is something we'd be discussing when we consider the draft secondary plan, because then we'll have all the details about how they'd be implemented, because the principles could be interpreted in different ways to different people, and I think it's completely fair to think that, to hear that sort of feedback on the draft secondary plan.
Thank you, that's a very helpful answer.
If I may, committee, I do have a quick technical question to staff. You mentioned a consultant. If you could speak to the consultant, who the consultant is on this.
Well, Madam Chair, Urban Strategies is a consultant, as Ms. Knierim pointed out. They've done a lot of work across the globe, really, but they also have done work throughout Ontario, mid-sized cities across the country, and they've also done work in London on a number of different larger studies. They work for the university, et cetera. So they're very familiar with the city, and they provide a wealth of knowledge and some comparators that they've been bringing to the table that'll help us.
Any other technical questions? Councillor Van Hulst, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our staff. Just looking at the principles, I think we hope development happens. Which of these are most likely to encourage development happening?
So through you, Madam Chair, in terms of encouraging development, I think that one that would be most likely to encourage development is Principle 6, identifying opportunities for intensification. That just being because it gives that certainty. Everyone's always concerned about sort of how tall can I develop, what will it look like? And by giving certainty, you sort of take away a lot of that back and forth. And certainty and clarity are always helpful and can be very encouraging.
Mayor Holder.
Thank you, and through your chair, I think to Mr. Fleming, I think you talked about the, you made reference to City Hall obviously with its 12 stories. Do you imagine in terms of this plan, and perhaps it's not to you, but in terms of the draft principles, that there would be nothing taller than the 12-story that City Hall represents as we consider what the boundary corridor is around Victoria Park? Sorry, on the, I'm not talking about on the Richmond Street side, I'm talking about the other side.
On the east side?
If I could, Madam Chair, through you, I'll begin, but certainly invite my colleagues to my right to chip in if needed. The City Hall lands, in fact, allow currently for a height greater than the current City Hall building. So I don't think that in our review that we're limiting ourselves in terms of height to the existing City Hall building height.
Well, of course, that makes me curious. What's the highest allowance available on the City Hall lands, if you have that at hand?
So through you, Madam Chair, it's 68 meters, so approximately 22 stories. And also in the London plan, so that's the zoning. But then in terms of the London plan, it is in the downtown place type, which allows a range of permitted heights up to 20 stories and then up to 35 with bonusing.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify that doesn't necessarily mean that's what we would recommend going forward, and we'll bring that forward.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other technical questions from the committee? I see none. I'd like to go up to the gallery, and I'll just start on my left here. We have 2 microphones. Please come forward, stating your name and address if you wish, and you do have 5 minutes.
My name's Anna Maria Velasco, and I'm just going to talk about Principle 6. So I just want to inform this committee that Victoria Park does not sit due south or due north or due east or west. It actually sits at an angle to the south point. So I thought those areas along Richmond Street have been identified as where the tallest and most intense buildings will go. They will shadow the park. And before you adopt this principle, you really need to do a shadow report. Because as it's been mentioned tonight, and it's been mentioned many times over, often you don't take risks as you're afraid of losing at the tribunal. So that would safeguard losing at the tribunal, that you dot your T's and cross your I's, or the other way around, sorry, to ensure that sunlight doesn't cast a long shadow across the park. Open spaces are important places to get sunlight for people that live in high rises. And often those open spaces are protected from shadowing. So that should be done before you adopt this principle, because it's based on an assumption. And I also want to remind this committee that North Talbot has the greatest heritage resources in the entire city. It's next to be studied as a heritage district, and my hope was that these combined neighborhoods, and Piccadilly is also listed to be studied, is that we actually foster a true heritage district. That's a destination site like Cabbagetown in Toronto, where people actually go to those places to really take a step back into history, and go there just for that reason and experience something they can't experience anywhere else in the city. So again, I'm asking that Principle 6 be reevaluated and a shadow study be done before you adopt that principle, because as it was mentioned, you don't want to lose at the tribunal, and I'm just asking you to dot your I's and cross your T's before that's adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please state your name and address if you wish.
My name is Kate Brabson. I'm speaking on behalf of the Woodfield Community Association, and I live in Woodfield. The Community Association currently has 286 households in its membership. We just had an AGM, and those have been confirmed. We have about 787 followers on our Facebook page. And currently, at our AGM, we discussed this in great length for almost about an hour, and the general consensus is that the Community Association is in favor of many of the draft secondary principles, which include intensification that is in scale with the park, that it enhances view corridors to Victoria Park from Princess Ave to Kent Street and continues to protect and enhance the park. It also protects we support protecting the residential character of Woodfield and respecting and conserving the heritage resources. So in response to the draft principles for Victoria Park Secondary Plan, we ask the following as the process moves forward: that the eastern and northern lands adjacent to the park remain as zones. Currently, my understanding is they are zoned for low density between 5 and 6 stories. Any exemptions to this zoning and policies in place would allow others to creep in. We also ask that any infill or new developments be low to mid-rise to protect and recognize the park as a small urban space. It's been compared to other urban spaces such as Central Park, which is not a fair comparison. As the city grows up and less outward, with more people living downtown and neighboring communities, green space such as Victoria Park that is protected and accessible becomes even more critical. Other cities have in place mechanisms to protect their downtown urban parks. We can too. We also ask that all proposed intensification, this is speaking to number 6 specifically, principle number 6, of the lands adjacent to the park be measured against the impact of the health of the park and the security to the Heritage Conservation District, as well as public access to this small space. We also ask that the impact of several new high-rise towers, or what the impact would be on the music festivals and the public events at Victoria Park. If the south end, as Mr. Fleming pointed out, under the downtown intensification plan is to be ringed with condos, and as he also said that a lot of those, that whole area, basically 2/3 of the park from Wolf down, is zoned for up to 35 stories, which includes bonusing. If that happens, they will be condos and expensive apartments, and I can only imagine that there'll be more noise complaints on the festivals. So it's something to think about. The city has recently installed a fair bit of infrastructure in Victoria Park to accommodate those festivals with electrical and water and so forth. It would be a shame to lose that. Also, to point to number 6, while fulfilling the city's intensification goal, we encourage that this secondary plan ensure the new towers go where they are appropriate. Currently, to my understanding, there are 400 units under construction in the downtown area, with another 3,000 units proposed in buildings also in the downtown area. This doesn't include the Auburn development application at the corner of Wellington and Wolf. There are many empty parking lots throughout the downtown area where these tall buildings could go. Also, and more recently, just with last week's news about the climate emergency, I'm wondering what London's response to that will be, and will it include impacts or changes to built form? For instance, thinking of wind studies or heat generation from hard surfaces such as buildings and concrete. If 35-story buildings were to ring the park, how would wind and heat patterns change their experience of the park for not only residents but the forest and the trees? Thanks very much for doing this. It's really important, and I'm happy that the city staff is doing the secondary plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the side of the gallery and to the top microphone. If you could state your name and address if you wish.
Hi, Matthew Hendry, Ward 7. Just speaking to principle number 6 of the secondary plan for Victoria Park. I'd like to thank the resident opposite for her statement. And to add to that, Victoria Park has over 52 out of London's 180 festivals every year. I personally remember having participated in the Barefoot Walk with For the Children for the past 3 to 4 years in a row. And I happen to know from that and other events, including RibFest and Sunfest, how important it is and central it is to bring our community together. If we don't place a limit on the height for the apartment buildings that are proposed for Victoria Park, if we don't place zoning limits, we risk turning Victoria Park into a fishbowl. And on this, as well as other issues, including the One River Development Plan, we frankly need to turn our record from having London placed as an environmental smog shack into London being the green and crystal jewel that it can be. The worst thing that the strategic plan and the budget can do right now in terms of London's environmental record is to not have any limitations on these apartment buildings and to roll back the ribbon at the Thames. The best thing that we can do for our future is to include the ribbon at the Thames and to include these limitations on the apartment buildings at Victoria Park. Further to this, we need to keep in mind that while our homelessness crisis isn't a secret, what is a secret is the number of solutions that are going unused. I'd like to quickly highlight the Ontario Renovates Fund, the Reserve Fund, Housing First, compassionate housing complexes, and boarding apartments as a few of the significant plans needed to be used to redress this crisis. While we continue to have roofs over our heads, 800 of our fellow Londoners are living on the streets, and we are in a watershed moment for social justice in the community. To move this forward is to move forward on empathy. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I continue on the gallery, I know there is someone on the second floor here with a presentation. I wonder if you're ready to present. And I want to welcome you, and if you could state your name and address if you wish, and you do have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of committee and staff. My name is Melanie Horton. I'm a registered professional planner, and I'm joined by McMichael Ruth. He's an architect with Tillman Ruth here in London. We're here this evening to talk, we're here representing Fari Holdings Corporation. As you may be aware, Fari Holdings owns and manages over 150 properties in the London area, including over 100 in the downtown core. And of relevance to this evening's discussion, Fari owns the block at the north end of Victoria Park, bounded by Richmond, Hyman, Central Ave, and Wellington. It's a very unusual and unique situation that there's a single landowner with ownership of an entire city block. I will also note that this block is, as you may have seen from the staff presentation, is outside of the Woodfield Heritage Conservation District. And here we have a unique opportunity for true infill development, which meets the city's desire to grow inward and upward. That could also preserve and respect the important heritage buildings that are in this block. This is just another vantage of the block. You'll see just at the south end here, Central Ave facing the park. You'll see the Woodfield residential area off to the sort of the north end of the slide, and then to the west, of course, some of the different higher buildings you have along Pall Mall. We understand that the proposed secondary plan for Victoria Park will attempt to rationalize some of the overlapping and competing policy objectives that apply to the areas surrounding the park, and we heard staff describe some of those earlier. The secondary plan will have an opportunity to provide a more comprehensive look at future development in the area. This park, as you've heard already from residents, represents a significant part of the character and focus of downtown London. The secondary plan provides an opportunity here for forward thinking that will ensure preservation of this landmark feature and encourage development that both respects the key features while taking advantage of unique opportunities for infill development. And one of those opportunities is here in the Richmond block. I'll turn it over to McMichael, who's going to describe.
Thanks, Molly. My name is McMichael Ruth with Architects Tillman Ruth Robinson. We just wanted to talk about opportunity, and certainly we see these principles and the secondary draft plan as an opportunity that can deal with the north side of the site as well. What you're seeing here is an infill development built in the center of the Richmond Place block. So at the bottom left-hand side of the screen is Victoria Park with Central Ave. And the intention with this is to build a tall development that's centrally located within the block. One of the things we want to make sure that is considered is putting a tall development like this on the north side of the site to limit the shadows it would cast on the park and anything that's happening within the park. We also think it's an opportunity to pull inboard of the historical houses, which would remain around the perimeter of the site, allowing it to, from a streetscape perspective and certainly from an eye line perspective, to maintain that lower scaled height around the park and then step up within the inner portions of the park. There's also an opportunity to actually fully integrate many of the historically listed buildings which are around the perimeter of the site with this new building, activating both the houses that are there as well as this future development through their integration. And finally, putting the tall building centrally located on the main central axis of the park at the north end has an opportunity to create something, a signature element and a visual terminus to the park.
Thank you, McMichael. I would note that in some of the discussions and some of the concepts that the city has been reviewing with the community, and you heard about the London plan does contemplate higher density along Richmond. So in this case, there's an existing functioning building. The base of it is a Symposium Cafe on Richmond. So to remove that or replace it with a taller building that makes less sense here than what this proposal would contemplate. We've heard a little bit of some of the notable parks in other urban centers, similar to London, some of the parks in Montreal, Dorchester Square at the top left there, Central Memorial Park in Calgary, Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, and Central Park in Winnipeg. So all, with the exception of Philadelphia, similar sized communities. And in each case, you'll see they are, the heights around those parks are fairly consistent, and there's an attraction of density around the park, which which we would suggest also makes sense here. So finally, we would encourage committee this evening, and I think this is consistent with what some of the residents have asked for, is to, rather than endorse the principles, to receive the principles this evening. As Councillor Squire pointed out, how they're going to be applied and interpreted is unclear. Principle 6, that calls for consistent heights,
Had 30 seconds.
could be
Sorry.
problematic with attracting intensity. Thank you very much for your time.
That was good timing. I'd like to go up to the top microphone, your name and address if you wish.
My name is Jennifer Granger. I live at 956 Colborne Street. I'm president of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario London Region branch. As per our media release of this morning, we as an organization support many of the secondary plan draft principles, but we would recommend the following ideas. We would suggest a one-block buffer of mid and low-rise buildings surrounding the park to protect the value and the appeal of its historic and ecological vistas. We believe that there should be heights of up to 12 stories, including bonusing, be permitted for the infill, that the infill should be on the surface parking lots surrounding the park. We would like to see a wide variety of commercial, office, community, and residential uses be permitted in the existing and the new structures so that there will be a mix of activity and people around the park. We would like all new infill development proposals to address any impact on the park itself as well as the West Woodfield Conservation District. The existing heritage structures around the park, including City Hall, the Canada Life buildings, or London Life buildings, and St. Peter's Basilica, they should all have their historic views be preserved and protected. We would like to see Kent Street be extended through to Victoria Park, creating a much improved and exciting view across Richmond Street. And we would also be very excited if it was possible for the city to create a new vision for the Civic Square, Reginald Cooper Square, right outside of this building, because it is right next to Victoria Park, and it would be wonderful to find some way to strengthen its connection with the park and actually have this mostly unused space actually be part of the exciting surroundings that the park would have. We're delighted to hear that there is a heritage consultant. I'm not sure if that name was given. If so, I missed it, but I'd be happy to hear who that is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Please state your name and address if you wish.
My name is Ben Lansing. I have a cold. I live at 507 Colborne Street. I'm the president of the Woodfield Ratepayers Association and chair and members, and your worship, Mayor Holder. Thank you for listening to me. The inaugural meeting of the Woodfield Ratepayers Association was held on Wednesday, April the 24th, 2019, commencing at 6:30 in the Stevenson and Hunt rooms at our public library. We're now in the process of creating a board of directors. I have been a real estate appraiser and consultant since 1974, and my family has lived in Woodfield since 1985. In 1987, the City of London presented a certificate of appreciation to my wife, Donna Lansing, in recognition of the preservation of London's heritage and quality of life displayed through the enhancement of the property at 503 Colborne Street. In other words, we fixed it up and it was designated, and council gave my wife the recognition. In 1990, I was appointed by London City Council to serve as a member at large on the at that time, Local Architectural Conservation Advisory Committee called LAC-AC, I believe. And this young lady was also a member at that time. We are life members of the Woodfield Community Association. In 2001, we constructed a new home in Woodfield where we continue to live. Woodfield is an older, eclectic neighborhood that embodies many forms and patterns of low, medium, and high-density residential, along with commercial, retail, office developments that have developed over the years. Why, we even have a body shop that fixes cars in our neighborhood. City Hall, where we are right now, is in Woodfield. Development in this neighborhood should not be judged by narrow standards of conformity. Heritage preservation is endorsed, but not at any cost. Real estate has and will always change. There is now and there will continue to be the need to replace existing buildings with new buildings. The Woodfield Community Association does not speak for the majority of the 4,000 plus or minus Woodfield residents. We at the Woodfield Ratepayers Association would like our voices heard. We fully intend to be an organized group of engaged residents. We're now in the process of writing a report supporting 30-story mixed-use apartment buildings within the 20-acre Victoria Park Figure 2 study area. To conclude, I would encourage this committee to receive, but not to endorse, Mr. Fleming's report, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. And yes, sir, if you can state your name and
My
address,
name is
if you
Arnon
wish.
Kaplansky, and I reside in the Whitfield also. The Whitfield Association does not represent me and many other people. And for the planning department of the city, it's time to go up and not out. And just stick by it. Protecting neighborhoods through the Heritage Act was not meant for that. You know, carte blanche, like putting a Heritage Act on the whole city will just stop development, stop infill, and the city will become stagnant. So I'm saying, work for the whole people, for the people of the whole city, and not self-interest groups like the Whitfield. They cost us too much money already. And also very bad development in the Whitfield that I can show you a couple of them anyway. So it's time to stop listening to a small group of people and listen to the people as a whole.
I think we should
Thank
be
you.
respectful. I'd like to go to the lady at the bottom here in the gray shirt. I know you've been waiting a while.
Okay. Thank you. It's Marianne Hodge. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Victoria Park, which is a group that started several years ago when the Auburn development first came up for discussion. And just as a note, it is part of that started with a change.org petition, which was supported by many people across the city. This is not just a Woodfield issue. So at this present time, the petition's been dormant for a couple of years, but it had close to 1,800 signatures from across the city at the time when this first came to council a couple of years ago. As a supply teacher, I talked to many people around the city, not just in the Woodfield neighborhood. And I can say that every time I bring up this conversation, because I talk to a lot of people about the issues that concern me, a lot of people are very shocked to hear that these issues are being contemplated, and the average person doesn't really, to be honest, get that engaged, right? But if you bring up the subject to people who aren't engaged, who don't have a personal agenda, including, you know, Woodfield residents, if you talk to other people in the community, the gist that I get is that they don't see the value of having really tall buildings surrounding the park. That there is a view to having things like the concept of a V for a view, so that the park is in the center and development rises up from that. And that way, the view is not monopolized by a few towers around the park, but it's actually shared by more people. And I don't know, maybe has more appeal for greater development around the park to share that view instead of isolating it. One of the other things I want to bring up is that we talk about one of the issues that came forward early in the discussion was about how to connect Victoria Park to Richmond Row. Because I don't know about you, but whenever I have company that come to London, where's one of the first things that you take your company to? You take them to Richmond Row and Victoria Park. And so building on that connection is important. I lived in Toronto for like 20 years, and the Gardiner Expressway was always the focus of everyone's conversation about how it cuts off the harborfront from the downtown area. And I see development along Clarence Street as being that Gardiner Expressway. We really want to bridge that gap between Richmond Row and Victoria Park, not create a barrier in between. So having the high-rise development on the other side of Richmond Street makes perfect sense, and then scaling it down to the park level. Another issue that is of concern is the fact that we see a lot of these proposals that come with 2 to 4 stories of parking above ground. And even though there might be a token cafe included as a amenity space, it really is a look of a parking garage at the street level. And so a lot of these high-rises require that much parking to accommodate the people in those buildings. Having more mid-scale buildings and low-scale buildings eliminates that requirement of parking. So it's almost a win-win that your lower floors are a lot more animated and more street-friendly. So again, I thank everyone for what's going to be a long meeting, I'm sure, and thank the staff for trying to include as many people as possible in this conversation.
Thank you. I'd like to go to this side of the gallery. Please state your name and address if you wish.
Okay. My name is Mary Frances O'Hagan, 460 Wellington Street here in London. And rather than looking at specifics, I'd rather look back in history at other cities and why what they did then makes them great today. And hopefully in the future, London, when we're long gone, London can join some of these cities. Victoria Park is a remarkable gem in the heart of London, an oasis of open calmness in the center of a busy urban space. With vista views both to and from on all 4 sides, it draws people into it and encourages them to stay. What makes Victoria Park so open and inviting are the low-density 5-story buildings on all 4 sides of its perimeter. And I'm speaking of the exact perimeter of the 4 streets. Preserving Victoria Park's perimeter is not in my backyard, but it's all about London's front yard. From the back door of my condo at 460 Wellington Street, I view the 2 high-rises on Picton Street. I have no problem with them being there. They do not impose on Victoria Park. I appreciate and enjoy these buildings and their residents, all ages and all wages. Intensification in downtown London is healthy for the city. High-rises do not need to be right on Victoria Park's perimeter. They can be in the city core, and Victoria Park can be preserved as it is. The open expanse of Victoria Park promotes the movement of people and ameliorates noise. It is a perfect venue for the annual events that are held here. Of great importance is the tourist dollar. I think sometimes we forget about the tourists, which has a 7-fold benefit for the city coffers. Recently, while in a queue for a concert at Wolf Hall in the Galleria Mall, I met a couple from Detroit who often visit London. They stay downtown in a hotel and tell me they enjoy walking through the open expanse of Victoria Park to shop on Richmond Row or attend the Grand Theatre. As is mentioned before, it is useless to compare Victoria Park to Central Park in New York City, and I see this all the time. Central Park is 845 acres compared to Victoria Park's 18. A more appropriate comparison is St. Stephen's Green, a 22-acre park in the heart of Dublin. St. Stephen's Green is in close proximity to Merrion Square, the park used by Urban Strategies at the meeting on January 24th. And I never see a Marion Square shown. Low-density, 4-story buildings surround the perimeters of these two parks and create an open green oasis in the heart of Dublin. Dublin is one of the most popular tourist cities in the world, in no small part due to St. Stephen's Green and Marion Square. Dublin has a population very similar to London's, and by the way, it's a UNESCO designated city. Almost a century ago, in 1925, the famous architect Le Corbusier proposed Plan Voisin, in which the Marais district in the 4th arrondissement and heart of Paris would be destroyed and replaced with 18 high-rise towers. Thank God, saner heads prevailed, and Plan Voisin was rejected. Today, the Marais helps make Paris the most tourist-visited city in the world. I plead with London's council to act like the Parisians did a century ago and preserve the open oasis in the heart of London. May we be consigned in history as the Londoners who saved her most precious gem, Victoria Park. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go to this side of the gallery if there's anyone wishing to speak. Mr. Brown.
Yes, Gary Brown, 59 Rideout, Parmer 35A. I have a lot of thoughts on this matter, so sorry if they're a bit jumbled. You know, I really support density. I've stood here and spoke in favor of the building by the Mail, the Canada Post and that. But I find here that I'm of a totally opposite mind and do not agree with any of these principles whatsoever. And you've all brought up one of the main points of this. You brought it up several times. You've all talked about transit. Well, I'm sorry, but the white men on this council voted against transit. Clarence is not going to be a transit corridor.
Excuse me, Mr. Brown.
My apologies, what?
I'd like you to be respectful in your
Sorry.
comments.
Anyhow, but if we're making a basis of design and principles on a transit corridor, there should at least be one there. You know, I spoke with the design consultants. I know him. He's done other work here in the city. I've known him quite well. And when I told him that Clarence Street will most likely not be a transit corridor, he was astonished. He did not know this. He said, my entire design would be different based on that. We talk about connections to Richmond Street. Well, what about running the park all the way over to Richmond Street? That would have been considered probably if we had not had one of the bases of this design, a transit corridor. We even talked about how about Clarence becoming a pedestrian mall, connecting Victoria Park all the way to Dundas Place. Wouldn't that be a magnificent walk to take, especially with one of the city's festivals taking place down there? There are many, many options. We're sitting here discussing the heights of buildings. I'm not even so sure we should be at that stage here. Personally, I would like to see the park run all the way over to Richmond Street and no height on Richmond Street. Totally, I've sat here and I've supported many times tall buildings to the west, intensifications. I mean, the previous city council, that was the most downtown intensification approved in the history of London. We are moving that way. We're getting there. We're doing a good job, I think, actually. But the question is, what should be done with this park? Personally, I see nothing on Richmond Street, maybe scaling up to 5 stories in the east to respect the Woodfield district as well. Wouldn't that be a beautiful historic vista? You know, someone's already brought up Ireland. It's one of the design principles, not just for Dublin, for that entire country to preserve historic vistas. You know, I live in Old South. I spent a lot of time saving the green and getting the city to purchase it. What's next? You're going to put a 40-story building next to the green? I mean, guys, there's some things that really matter to the quality of life. I love the idea of downtown intensification. But if the justification is that this is a transit node, and it is one of the basis of the design was made on, then does this not need to go back to the drawing board to think about what are the other options we have as a city, as citizens? So this is Victoria Park. This is the heart of our city. The normal school and the green was the heart of Old South. None of us can imagine a tall building around the green. I can't imagine tall buildings around Victoria Park. I think it's really important that we enjoy that as public good, as public safety. And I'm here to say, send the whole thing back. I think that you would be very shocked at what designs come forward, knowing that we are not running transit down Clarence Street. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the top microphone. Please state your name and
Yes,
address if you wish.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jake Skinner, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. First off, I just want to say that I think principles are important to have, and I applaud staff for taking a stab at this because it's very important to have those established before moving forward. So that's really great. I'd like to bring your attention to a letter recently issued to all city councils in Ontario by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Honourable Steve Clark. As the Government of Ontario drafts the Housing Supply Action Plan and further reviews the Planning Act and Provincial Policy Statement to achieve their streamlining and housing supply objectives, he has cautioned city councils to put a pause on all major planning changes such as official plans, secondary plans, or comprehensive zoning bylaw updates. This letter was sent mid-February as a courtesy to city councils so they do not work unnecessarily and can focus on other priorities. I read from this letter, quote, "My intention is to bring forward legislation and concrete policy changes that would impact planning province-wide in the coming months. I encourage you to consider the context of this streamlining work and its focus on the Planning Act and the Provincial Policy Statement as it may help to inform your local actions. You may wish to consider an interim pause on some planning decisions or reviews of major planning documents such as official plans or comprehensive zoning bylaw updates until this work is completed." The Victoria Park Secondary Plan is a major planning document, and it is important that the principles adopted align with provincial guidelines. This is a good stopping point until further instructions are received from the province. Once that occurs, then it would be, in my opinion, appropriate to make a decision about the principles before you today. This would maximize your impact as a planning committee and give you the information you need before forwarding a recommendation to City Council. I recommend that you receive this report today rather than endorsing it, as it is a good update on where things stand until further instruction is received. The principles, I think, should be revisited then. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Please state your name and address if you wish.
Hi, my name is Derek. I live on 396 Queen. Just wanted to speak mostly for the Principle 6, I guess, about the intensification. So I live downtown currently, and I'm a young professional that works downtown, and I highly value living close to work. I'm able to walk to work where I rent currently, and I would like to somewhat soon buy somewhere downtown, which is kind of right in line with a lot of the high-rise intensification around Victoria Park. A lot of the developments that have been talked about that I've been following this along since the beginning, and a lot of those developments would be great places to work. They're all fairly close to where I work, so I'd be able to walk in. Don't really use my car too often anymore, which is nice. So I guess specifically to the Wolf Street development, since it was brought up at the beginning there, whatever stories it is, but 17, I guess. To me, that's a perfect place, like for the majority of young professionals. I've talked to a lot of my friends. They don't really pay attention to this sort of thing, so I've sort of floated it out there to them, and a lot of them agree with me. It would be kind of the perfect spot if you do work downtown to live there, to walk to work, bike to work, whatever it may be. A lot of us don't really want to drive to work. It's not ideal, especially being close to downtown. If you can avoid it, it'd be great, and developments such as that one or the other one surrounding the park and the higher density, to me, is perfect. It's densification. It's something that we should be leaning towards in the downtown core, and I can't afford the houses that are downtown, so condos would be preferred. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of speak from, I guess, a young professional perspective for that. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there someone? Yes, please come forward. State your name and address if you wish.
Okay, my name is Kelly McKeating, and I live at 329 Victoria Street. I want to start out with a question, and I do understand I can't ask questions and it's not going to get answered, but this is a bit of a follow-up to Councillor Turner's question. I'm not a lawyer, but I had always understood that a Heritage Conservation District plan took precedence over city bylaws, and it concerns me that in all of the discussions around the secondary plan and the drafting of it, that there has not been, as far as I can tell, a real discussion about how these two items, which to me, the specifics of the secondary plan may not be consistent with the objectives and particularly policy 4.3 of the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District plan. And if this secondary plan won't be able to be implemented without de-designating the Heritage Conservation District, that would be very unfortunate. And I think it's something that the public should understand better, like just the legalities of the process around that. As with most people, my comments are primarily on the sixth principle. I want to reiterate the fact that views do work two ways. And while it would be great to live in a high-rise looking down on Victoria Park, the people in Victoria Park want to look at a pleasant streetscape, and the current streetscape is by and large a really spectacular view. With regards to scale, the oft-used comparison to Central Park is clearly not appropriate. The absolute tallest building on Central Park is 8%. In terms of height, its height is 8% of the length of Central Park. A 22-story building would be approximately 19% of the length of Victoria Park. So that would be proportionately 2.5 times higher than the one tallest building around Central Park. So to think about one or two sides of Victoria Park being framed by buildings that are proportionately that much higher, it does seem that one needs to think about whether that would be optimal or desirable. I found myself thinking as I was listening to one of the other speakers about how Paris's city council might react if somebody proposed that the Champs-Élysées, that all of the buildings bordering the Champs-Élysées be demolished and replaced with 32-story or 22-story buildings. It just does not fit the urban gem at the center of our city that is Victoria Park. And those are my comments.
Thank you. I'd like to go to this side of the gallery. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on this side? Please come forward. I see none. I'll go to this side. Please state your name and address if you wish.
Hello, my name is Mary Bray, and my address is 228 Central. I live across from Victoria Park on the north side, and I must say the building right beside me is a 4-story building, and the shadow that the 4-story building, or if it was a 30-story building, to me, it would be the same. I'm on the second floor. And as far as I'm concerned, if you go to Singapore or New York, Dubai, any of those big cities, you do see parks with lovely tall buildings. And if we think about One London Place, does anybody say, "Oh, that's too high"? I see it from my apartment. It's beautiful. It's with the glass and it overlooks the trees. I still see the beautiful trees in Victoria Park. And if the Woodfield and the people loving Victoria Park, I like it too. But let's instead go over to Reg Cooper Square and make that into part of Victoria Park. It's pretty awful. I mean, it's full of weeds, and maybe the city could do something there. Anyway, I think that we need to be a little more creative about what's happening around the park and not having so many festivals and that. Now that they spent $28 million doing Dundas Place, let's move those festivals down there and stop destroying the park. Look at the park. The last couple of weekends, there's been festivals there and road races, and it's a mess. And I think the big festivals are hurting the park far more than another high-rise that we desperately need downtown. What's living in Victoria Park are the homeless. We need homes for these people. We need housing downtown. There hasn't been nearly enough housing put into the downtown. We need 25,000 people living down here to make a real community. And how are we going to do it if we don't do high-rise? A 30-story building, to me, with a smaller footprint, is more important than a short, squatty building that's ugly. The city built the Dearness Home down on Wellington. It's not a very tall building, but it's not a very attractive building. And I think if you build a taller, beautiful buildings in downtown, I think it'll help our heritage neighborhoods. I've probably designated as many heritage properties as anyone in the city, and I appreciate heritage. And more than that, I guess I'm saying my 2 cents worth, and thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And is there anyone else on this side that would like to speak? See none, we'll go to this side. Please state your name and address if you wish.
My name is Dania Walker, and I live at 570 Wellington. And I consider myself to have been very blessed to come to London. And when I first came, Victoria Park was the gem that I saw. And it still remains a gem. It's a beautiful park. And I never knew that I would be able to live in this area, and it has been a blessing. But I would hope that we would consider the fact that we don't want to obstruct the view and we don't want to hurt the area. Obviously, we have a heart for people, and we want to provide for people, and we want to provide affordable housing for people. But I think it's wise for us as a city to consider the perimeter of the park and just the beauty that we have, and not to destroy it, but to provide housing in an area and in height that will be supportive of a healthy park and beauty for anyone who comes to our city.
Thank you. And I'd like to go to this side. Mr. Priamo?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please state your name and
Yeah, Greg Priamo.
address.
I'm here tonight acting on behalf of Great West Life Realty Services. They own the property at the southeast corner of Wolfe and Wellington. And we have been participating in the secondary plan process fully. We think to date it has been an effective process. And it has largely followed the guidance that city staff provided at the beginning of the process. And we will continue to participate in that process, and hopefully there will be an outcome that is as beneficial as possible under the circumstances. That being said, and has been addressed by a number of speakers tonight for different reasons, quite frankly, but nonetheless the conclusion was the same, is that we're of the view that Planning Committee has not been presented with sufficient information to be able to reliably endorse these principles and not unintentionally or unnecessarily constrain the scope of the discussion that could go forward as we move toward a draft secondary plan. And for instance, in our circumstance, my client is looking through this from the lens of a landowner, as has mentioned from other speakers, of a parking lot in the downtown. that's fully zoned and ready for heights of up to 90 meters. And whether it is a residential building or in fact, it's a downtown area zone, so we could do an even taller commercial building. And that being said, we've engaged in the discussions with the consultants and with planning staff because we want to be part of a solution. But in order to understand the implications for us and our clients' lands, the analysis hasn't gone far enough yet. And there isn't that information. So like many of the other speakers this evening, I would encourage Planning Committee to receive these guidance documents for what they are, receive them, but don't endorse them to the extent that they will unnecessarily constrain the debate going forward. Because it's helpful to understand where staff's head's at. It's helpful to understand for council to understand where the public input is and what principles are starting to evolve in the process. But I think it's too early at this point to be able to take these and say, yes, definitely we should adhere to these principles and all future work be guided by these principles. And allow all of the stakeholders to continue to participate in what has so far been a positive process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Please state your name and address if you wish.
Hi, my name's Jason, and I just wanted to speak to some of the concerns that some of the previous speakers had about the views. And I like to point out that it looks pretty daunting looking at all these bird eye views of the park, and you see all these tall buildings, and that's not really what you're going to see from the ground level. You're going to see these potentially beautiful podiums of all of these tall buildings, and then you look up, you see trees and then a bit of sky. You're not looking at these tall buildings because they're mostly obstructed because of the trees in Victoria Park. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there for someone to consider that, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to go to the side. Is there anyone here that would like to speak? Please come forward. I see none, and I'll go to this side, and I'll ask one more time if there's anyone here that would like to speak to the Victoria Park secondary plan. I see none. I would like a motion, therefore, to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And just before I go to the committee, I would like to go to staff with two questions that were asked by the public, since the public is here. One was the name of the heritage planner, and the second question, I guess just following up on Councillor Turner's question about when there's two secondary plans. I know staff responded, but I wonder if you could have clarification how the heritage conservation plan what plan will take precedent and how that would work?
So thanks so much. Madam Chair, in terms of the heritage consultant we've secured, ERA Consultants, they've done a variety of heritage work, both for projects and on application-specific bases, both internationally and throughout Ontario. We've secured them to do a peer review of the plan, so they'll be looking at it to make sure that the heritage, it properly accounts for protecting the heritage resources and responding to the heritage resources. And then in response to the other question about how this plan would work with the HCD plan, so that's also why we've secured the heritage consultant, because they'll need to show that heritage resources are appropriately conserved. And so this plan would establish the policy framework in terms of sort of the development permissions for the sites, or the development framework for the sites, and the framework for various other connections and how the area would develop going forward, that when an application comes in, it's reviewed against. So the heritage consultant will be looking to make sure that there isn't anything that conflicts with the Heritage Conservation District Plan, such that it's establishing a framework that when an application comes in, it would need to be reviewed against the secondary plan and the respective Heritage Conservation District Plan. But the consultant's making sure that they're there to make sure that, provide that extra lens to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for conflicts.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I just want to apologize because I have to be at leave in 10 minutes. I have to be at Western University to coincidentally talk to a medical class about advocating in front of counselors. So I'm not going to tell you how you did tonight, but I'm just going to say this. Nobody took my hint, which was that we weren't arguing about what the final plan should look like, but really the process. And I'm really happy, actually, that some people thought the principles went too far, and some people didn't think they didn't go far enough. And I think that tells us that they sort of ended up in the middle, which is probably where they should be. That being said, I think it's really important that the committee, and certainly myself, I'm not going to tell you anything about what I think about what you said, because that's for the end of the process. That's after we have all the input and we hear from everyone. That's when planning committee and council will be saying, here's what we want in the actual plan. So that being said, I don't want anybody to come out of tonight feeling that they've obtained some kind of advantage in this battle because of what the principals say. So I think we should just receive them and file them, let this process proceed on, and you'll all have another chance to come back and express, to a great extent, the same views you've expressed tonight. And get on with this thing. I think we're spending a lot of time tonight dealing with something that I don't think staff intends to be written in concrete. They said quite clearly, this doesn't dictate heights, it doesn't tell us what the buildings are going to look like, although you've obviously expressed that tonight. So I'm happy, and if I have to leave before there's a vote, I would have voted to receive and file, and we'll all be back here in the fall, you know, debating it again. So that's the way it goes, but I'm sorry, you're not going to get me tonight to tell you what I'm going to vote or what my final decision would be, because I have to wait for this process to play out. So if somebody wants, I'm prepared to move that we receive and file the report, and then if you vote on it really quickly, then I'll have a vote on that before I leave, but that's where I am.
Okay, so I understand there is a motion on the floor. I do have a seconder. Yes, Councillor Turner for clarification.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, just to clarify the councillor's intent. The recommendation from staff is to endorse the principles, and Councillor Squire is not moving in that direction. Is that correct? Thank you.
From what I understand.
Yeah, I'm not saying throw out the principles, change the principles in any way. I'm just saying receive and file this and let staff go ahead. And I just don't want someone to leave here thinking, oh, we've got an advantage because of what the principles are. That's fine. So I'll be gone at 6:30. You can talk about me when I'm gone.
So the motion is to receive and file. The staff's recommendation is to endorse the principles. So there is a seconder. And any debate? Mayor Holder. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess first, if we're going to do that, if I might ask through you, Madam Chair, what the implications of just receiving these principles are rather than endorsing them. I believe that in order to move forward with creating a draft secondary plan, that we would need to have endorsed principles, would we not?
Mr. Fleming.
Madam Chair, we're in the hands of the committee for sure on this. Really what we're trying to do is check in and see if we're on the right track or not. And so what I would hope is that the committee wouldn't just be receiving this and not telling us if they have a concern with one or more of the principles. But in other words, we're fine if they're not formally endorsed, but please let us know if we're not on the right track here, if there's any of these principles that you as a committee are feeling we should be looking at perhaps differently, or if you'd like us to study them further, or if there's just some concern that you have around the principles. And that gives us some sense of where we might look so that we can prepare a plan that's coming in at least on track.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fleming. I'm not going to support that recommendation. I would support the staff recommendation of endorsement of the principles, and here's why. We heard a lot of people, and a very conspicuous, coordinated receive but don't endorse from industry on this specifically. And that concerns me a little bit. But the second part is that in order to move forward, I really think we do need to endorse. Those who spoke to say receive but don't endorse, no one, not one, said what they would amend to any of these. And that's a concerning part. If we were going to be changing these in some way, then I would expect that somebody say receive but don't endorse. What's wrong with the ones that are in front of us? What are the constraints? How does it impair any development that might be proposed? I didn't hear that at all. The only thing I did hear, I heard from one speaker to say reject them all. But in both circumstances, I haven't heard what needs to be amended, what's not appropriate with what's been put forward here. I think they are quite appropriate. I think they're fairly encompassing, and I don't think they're restrictive either. I think what they do is they say, here's the principles we heard from the community, here's the principles we heard from the stakeholders that might be interested in development along the way. And so I guess I'm perplexed why we would just receive them. So I encourage the committee not to follow the recommendation from Councillor Squire, and instead, when we have the opportunity, to do the alternative, which would be endorse the principles in front of us.
Thank you. There is a motion on the floor. Is there anyone else? Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. The reason I was comfortable supporting Councillor Squire's amendment is just like Mr. Fleming said, he said receive, but looking for more direction. We heard from the Woodfield Neighborhood Association who didn't like specific aspects or perhaps a specific aspect of the recommendation. You heard from the Woodfield Ratepayers group that didn't like certain aspects of it. You heard from individuals who were speaking very specifically to an issue, but a number said don't accept the recommendation to proceed with staff's direction, rather to receive. I think that does give us the opportunity, Chair, to be able to review this in future and give some additional direction to staff. So I'm comfortable with what I've heard from the public and what I've heard from around this table, that I think the appropriate next step would be to receive, and then as need be, take the appropriate next steps.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will not be supporting the motion that's on the floor. I'm looking at the principles again. Read their report. The principles are fairly broad, and it gives staff a path to move forward. When I heard from residents, I didn't hear residents say, don't endorse these principles. I heard residents say, specifically about intensification, when you move forward, when you come up with the draft secondary plan, make sure you follow these guidelines. Make sure, you know, if this is the principle, make sure down the road the principle translates into something else, specifically lower heights around the park. So I didn't hear anyone specifically speak against the principles as outlined. And I think we need to endorse these principles so that staff can move forward. When we have the draft plan before us, that's when you'll all come back here, I imagine, and that's when we'll get into a much more specific debate about the draft secondary plan. But I think we will leave staff blowing in the wind, not really understanding how to move forward if they don't have a starting point. And I think the draft these principles are the starting point. I will be supporting the staff recommendation if that is what is eventually moved.
Thank you. Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll make a few comments about our situation. First, I don't know if I would want to make any final decision without seeing some virtual reality on this. I think we've got technologies now that would save us from this debate about, oh, that's too high, that's not too high, this is too far away, that's too far away, this is going to cause a shadow that's bad, it's not going to cause a shadow. We could actually program this in, put on some goggles, walk around the park and actually check and see what it looks like from where we are. It's interesting, somebody pointed out up here that probably wouldn't see many of the buildings because of the trees. So we'd be able to
Excuse me,
see that.
Councillor Van Holst. I know
Thank you.
there's
Okay.
someone that has to leave, and I just want to just remind you about that.
Okay, right. Well, I'll then, having said that, I think some of these principles are too vague. And what people, particularly the developers, may be looking for is something more specific. They don't want to see something that where they try to come up with a plan and all of a sudden what this is changes. Enhanced landscape around Victoria Park. So that could mean a number of things that impact their properties. There's a number of these others. Some of the things I think are great, but I think there's a number that would create, it's just too much uncertainty in them to say we have to do this. So the receipt is probably a better idea.
Thank you. And if the committee will allow me, I'll just make a quick comment here. I will not be supporting this motion. To receive and file, from what I understand. I think staff in this endorsement of the principles are looking for, see if we're on the right track. We know we're going to be back here in June, around June, with another public participation meeting to look at the draft secondary plan. There'll be a further conversation about the plans. I think that will happen at that time. And then again, the plan finally being endorsed sometime in the fall. So I'll leave that with the committee, and there is a motion. Is there anyone else that would like to make comments? I see none. Yes, please.
Whatever happens with the vote, I'm really happy that committee indulged me and it's going to allow me to get out of here in a reasonable time. So I really do appreciate that, and I'll leave very, very happy knowing that.
We are trying to accommodate you, Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 2-4.
And with that, if there are any further comments, and Councillor Turner. Sorry, Deputy Helmer.
I wanted to make sure Councillor Squire could get out of here before I spend a lot of time talking about this issue. But I looked over the principles and I think that they're reasonable. You know, I think we have to be open to the possibility that when the plan comes forward that there might be some adjustments. And I don't want people to think that in the secondary planning process that, you know, these decisions cannot be changed as we're moving forward. I think it is a iterative process. A lot of times what happens is staff work in isolation and work away on these things and then come back with the draft, the full draft. And I think for this one, you can see how many people have come out with different ideas and different priorities. I think it's really smart to have a discussion about what the principles are and to check in on those. I don't think there's full agreement on them. I've gone through a couple of secondary planning processes where you come in partway through the process, and getting it right at the front end about what exactly we're trying to achieve here is really important. And so I think having the discussion was a good idea. When I look at the principles, I don't see anything in there that really seem problematic. I think all those are fine. They are in conflict with each other, some of them. The whole idea that you're going to have podiums all the way around kind of implies that there's something taller on top of the podium. So I think that there's some conflict there, and I think that's why people are a bit uneasy about the principles and having them be endorsed. But I think endorsing them at this point gives staff a direction to keep working away along the lines that they have been. I think we have to be open to the possibility that some things might come back and be a bit different, even in the principal side. We might say, you know what, we took it to the draft and we realized that there's this new principle that we hadn't considered, and that could be added in. And so I think we have to stay open-minded for that. I definitely do not think, and this was raised by one member of the community, that we should just hit pause and stop doing planning while we wait for the province to tell us what to do. So we'll have to keep doing our work. The staff here, all the developers who are working on projects, and a planning committee.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Helmer hit on a lot of the good points there. I think there's some key concepts I hope as we move forward we're cautious with. One is as we put a lot of efforts into revitalization of downtown and really talking about densification, we spent a lot of time with the London plan to identify places to grow and places for intensity. Significant modifications of that could undermine those efforts in other places, and it kind of squeezes the balloon a little bit and moves things to other places. So I'm sure that's something that's going to be considered as the next steps of the secondary plan move forward. As Councillor Helmer talked about, not putting pause on the process right now. The irony to that is if we would do that, then we'd really be left with the framework that we have right now, which would lead us to a rejection of the application that's on the floor that led us to the secondary plan process, because it would be completely contrary to the Heritage Conservation District and the official plan policies that we have in place right now. So that would absolutely fail at the tribunal if it were to move forward. Certainly, I was apprehensive of the process of moving into the secondary plan process because of what the implications might be. I think what's proposed here is a very reasoned approach to it and moves us forward and contemplates a lot of the things that hadn't been contemplated in that holistic form, to take a look at the area around Victoria Park and especially those northern properties on the north end, which had been excluded from discussion about the development in the area. So that's a really key point to me. Ms. Filastro had talked about the importance of a shadow study. I think that would be an important thing to bring forward as a constituent component of the secondary plan to show what the different applications were if density was done at different height levels around the park in different zones and different times of year. Knowing that we probably have more impact from northern development than we would on southern development in terms of impact on the park itself from a shadow perspective. I think some of the stuff that I did here, there's the question of where are we going to put density. I keep hearing that, and how are we going to create vibrant city. That's not really the argument or debate right now because we have so many identified places within this. The question that does remain for us is, in absence of a north-south rapid transit corridor along Clarence, how does, whatever the future might hold for us, how does this complement and fit in to the future state plans or whatever they may be? And that's a big question mark that's left for us now after not moving forward with the north leg. So those are the thoughts that I had. I'm trying to see if there's another one, but this is a bit more of a commentary than anything else, I suppose. But the largest constituent groups that we're talking about rejecting or just receiving these, it's very similar to the discussions that we have about extending the urban growth boundary. The people that are always most vocal about expanding the urban growth boundary are the ones who have interests, financial interests, just outside of the boundary. And that's exactly what we heard today. Those most financial staked interests looking to see that boundary moved so that there could be an opportunity for development there. Not to say that that's not a reasonable reason. You would expect that to be brought forward, but I think it's something that's worth noting, and I think it's something we should pay heed to. So with that, I think, Madam Chair, if I might move the staff recommendation. I'm not sure if that's been put forward yet, but.
It hasn't. Councillor Turner is moving the motion, and I would like a seconder. And with Councillor Cassidy, and I would like to go to Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Just to be clear, though, there's nothing wrong with proponents who have a financial interest to be able to advocate for their position. I think that's totally legitimate and extremely reasonable. And I would say that for us to have, look, we defeated the amendment, and I accept that, but to receive the report would not have been the last opportunity for us to be able to provide staff direction with respect to this issue. In fact, I think the opposite is true. So while parts of this recommendation make sense, and I know that staff is looking for specific direction, frankly, I'm not sure what your takeaway from this is. I won't be supporting the motion, just to make the statement that there are some other views and perspectives that I'll look forward to, ironically, I'll look forward to providing to staff, as I'm sure other members of council will, as we will, having input from our community, which is so important. So thank you, staff, for doing this. I think it's hard work, and I think you've done a really good job. Having said it, I think there will be parts of this that I believe will need some additional work, and certainly happy to offer my thoughts as we go, as I believe the gallery has done, I think, quite clearly as well.
Councillor Cassidy.
I didn't, I'm just. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I'm having an offside conversation with the mayor here. I'm happy to second the motion. I'm happy to support the staff recommendation. I just want to point out to all interested parties, again, that no decisions have been made on any particular development or development application, and no decisions have been made exactly detail-wise on how high the buildings will be on Central versus Wellington, et cetera. This is just moving forward with the principles that staff have identified through very extensive community engagement with stakeholders and neighborhood groups and other people in the community. So it's really important that I point that out. And I remember when the Wolf Wellington application came to planning, and I remember asking staff, why isn't there a secondary plan around Victoria Park? We have secondary plans all over the place. Why wouldn't we have a secondary plan around Victoria Park? So I'm very pleased to see this move forward and keep moving forward. If you look at the principles, open up view corridors to Victoria Park, create new connections to Victoria Park, enhance landscaped edges, respect and conserve heritage resources, frame Victoria Park with appropriately scaled podiums. I did notice the notes from one of the community, or a couple of the community engagement exercises, that people had crossed out the word podiums and changed it to buildings. So, it's obviously something that that there's a conflict on, and it's something that I'm expecting staff will come forward with appropriate real direction and measures in the secondary plan. And then identify opportunities for intensification. That doesn't mean 22 stories everywhere. That doesn't mean 30 stories on the south east side of Wolf and Wellington. That's what it says in the official plan right now. It could be 30 stories with bonusing at Wolf and Wellington on the southeast side. That doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. So I'm going through a secondary plan process right now in Ward 5 in the Masonville area. And we just went through a development application that was approved by the majority of City Council against my fervent wishes, but it was approved. And I'm working now with the community in Ward 5 to see and understand the benefits of a secondary plan, because that whole area around Masonville Mall right now is identified as a rapid transit corridor, and it contemplates buildings up to 22 stories. So that means in this big area, with a secondary plan, we see the area, and this is what could be contemplated there, but we have more specific details and say, yes, this specific area could see buildings of this size, but we prefer to see them along these major routes or at this major intersection or something like that, and then transitioning down to different areas within that area. So it gives some specificity and a holistic planning program to the area rather than the piecemeal approach, which causes a lot of stress and anxiety in a community. So I see these principles as not prescriptive right now. I see this as a concept phase right now. Again, a roadmap for staff, direction from us for staff to continue down the path that they've started after a lot of community engagement. I think they've done a very good job so far through you, Madam Chair. I want to say thank you for this very comprehensive report and all the work you've done in the community. And I want you to continue that work and continue to engage all of the stakeholders and all of the people that have come out tonight. But again, it's going to get harder. This is the easy part, the draft principles that everybody agrees, like these are good principles. And I've spoken to one landowner, one possible development coming forward, you know, about some of these principles and saying, you know, yeah, these are some principles that they endorse as well. So this is the easy part. It's only going to get harder, and we'll see what happens down the road. But for now, this is something that I will support.
Thank you. And if I could just sum up and make a few comments here from the chair, I really want to thank the committee. I think we do a good job listening to each other's different perspectives as well to come up with a solution here. And hopefully I will be supporting staff's recommendation. I think it is really important that we give staff an idea of the principles and if we're on the right track. I think that's what we're doing here by endorsing these principles. I want to thank the community for coming out too and hearing the different perspectives as well. It's really important that we do hear that. And I want to thank staff for the work that you have done. I know there's a lot of work that goes into this. We are not ending this conversation. We'll probably be back here in June again with a public participation meeting looking at the draft secondary plan and then again finally endorsing it in the fall time. So one thing I've learned here, just to sum it all up, is that how important Victoria Park is to the whole city of London. I think that is something that has struck me as I've always known that to some extent, but hearing it and hearing the compassion and what this park means to the city is opened up my eyes. So thank you, committee, and we do have a motion on the floor.
Closing the vote, the motion passes 4-1.
And moving on to items of direction for the Lambeth Main Streetscape Master Plan Concept and Background Document, as well as the Hamilton Road Streetscape Master Plan document. I know there's two items there. They are similar. I want to just let the committee know that these are items for direction coming from staff to direct and approve the first one, which is 4.1, the Lambeth Main Streetscape Master Plan Concept and Background Document. And I know when I looked at this first, I thought, oh, we've just gone through a CIP and what's this all about? And we've almost completed a infrastructure development project on Main Street. But this is really coming from our 2012 master plan document and complete streetscapes. And it's just that process where we're going to look at transportation and projects and how we move around our intersections. So I wonder if staff can make a comment and then I'll ask the committee.
Through you, Madam Chair. So both of these reports, the Lambeth Main Street Master Plan and the Hamilton Road Main Street Master Plan, I guess I'll speak to the first one first. So it was really a collaboration between transportation, planning, and various other service areas. It came out of the Hamilton Road Community Improvement Plan process and kind of intertwined with the infrastructure renewal program. This is really, we've done the kind of shorter term project in implementing the infrastructure renewal project, but then this is taking it a step forward to adopt it seek direction to adopt it as a guideline document so that the larger, longer picture, longer term vision of redevelopment along the corridor and implementing improvements and enhancements like on-street parking as properties consolidate and redevelop can be realized through the development process on both private and public property. Ted Koza is here from Transportation. He can speak a little bit more to, oh, sorry, Carl Grabowski from Transportation is here, and he can speak a little bit more about the process to date and the infrastructure projects and the documents that are presented.
Welcome, Mr. Grabowski. I'm not used to you being here at planning, but if you could expand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we're talking about the Main Street project and to start with. And,
yes, we are on the Lambeth Main Street project.
And really the works that have occurred over the last year are in conformity with the streetscape plan. It formed a basis and it had input from the community, and it's been well received so far, and it's coming to close to completion early this summer. So I think most of the community is looking forward to seeing the improvements, the pedestrian realm and additional trees that'll be along the way. And I think it's gone well. The streetscape plan will, as was mentioned, form the basis for future developments along the way. And with the new sewers there, we are expecting some redevelopments to happen. Without the sewers, it had some limitations before. So I think it's all good news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? So we'll just deal with the first one, which is 4.1 Lambeth. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'll move that, and I just wanted to say, I know that this has been something that's underway for quite some time, and in some ways the plan is landing after some of the projects that already happened, but I know it's a lot to coordinate, and some of these things have been in draft for quite a while, and I'm glad to see that on the ground, what's actually getting built is consistent with what we're seeing in the streetscape plans. I was just through Lambeth not that long ago. You can see that there's things that are happening that are very consistent with what we've got here in the plan, and I think it's setting up for success. It's in a really important part of the city, that Main Street in Lambeth, and I just wanted to say it's really good work on this particular one.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see a lot of the really neat elements in there. I was just curious through you, Madam Chair, the source of the design standard that comes from, is that from the, what's the name of the Ontario Transportation Manual or something like that? I'm really mucking up the name of the book that kind of says where, I guess, the width of lanes, how cycling facilities are put in, where they're appropriate, at what scales. Is that the source of the design?
Do we know the name of the plan?
The plan, there's Ontario traffic manuals. There's several aspects that are incorporated into it, whether it's signage, lane widths, and it's more recently you've seen the complete streets, and it does fit in with that as well. So it's all good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a non-frequent visitor to Civic Works, I don't get the background as much, but I try to follow it as much as I can. Taking a look at the design scheme for Colonel Talbot and Longwoods and Maine, that one, and just in the conceptual design, doesn't have any cycling facilities in it. And one of the things, as a cyclist, I know that as I come through, that's a key connector for rural cycling and backing into the city and trying to connect into Victoria or Springbank Park and the multi-use pathway system. And coming down from Colonel Talbot from the 402 is a challenging stretch. I know that that's not the section of the design through here. It's really just the Main Street component of it, but also heading out to Longwoods and heading out that way. That connection in there, I think, would be really important if we can bring that in somehow. But I do appreciate I see in the other designs where the cycling lanes might be. And just want to make sure that those aren't ones that end up just kind of getting to a place and then dying and not having anything to continue through.
I've often had the same questions. Mr. Gabalski, if you could answer them, especially as it relates to the cycling lanes on Main Street.
Thank you, through the chair. There is cycling that comes into from Hamlin and it travels north on Campbell Street. In the longer term, with redevelopment along Main Street, the widening will provide the space for in boulevard bike lanes or bike paths. And that's shown in the secondary or the streetscape plan, and more as we get the lands available. The 20-meter right-of-way leaves some significant limitations for what we can do in a safe manner for the cyclists. So it hasn't been forgotten. It is there, and more on the longer term where we'll have more space to work with.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
I thought I was seconding that, which I'm happy to do, and compliments on your work on this. No, I'm quite prepared to second this.
Thank you. So we do have a motion to adopt the streetscape plan for Lambeth as a guideline document.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving along to 4.2, which is the Hamilton Road Streetscape Master Plan concept and background document. And I know the Council of the Ward is here if you'd like to make a comment.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll extend that thank you through you, Madam Chair, to our staff for the work on this. Exciting to see that, again, the report's just being endorsed now, but the work has been done. And I think it's very exciting what's happening on Hamilton Road. And of course, on May 1st, we're embarking on a rezoning of the whole corridor, and that's going to provide some great opportunities as well. So by the fall, we'll have pretty much every tool in place for a very rapid regeneration of this corridor, which is happening already. Very exciting to see some new business owners coming in and asking them, welcome them, ask them why they're here, and they think, well, they believe it's the next upcoming place to invest. So all our plans are working. That's great. You might recall that I had come to council hoping to get the the hydro wires put underground, and it was quite expensive to put the poles and the transformers underground. But one of the residents suggested that maybe just the lines across the street might be put underground. In a couple of instances, we did that in sort of a key area, and it looks much nicer. I wish I'd thought of that there might be maybe half a dozen more drops that we could have done as well. However, going forward, I may ask for that, because it really makes for a nice look, even with the rest of the hydro there. So it's I'm excited to see what's going to happen. Work on the little Woodnerf Street is happening in Sackville, and we'll see some great things by the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. You've given me a great idea asking for the wires to come down in Lambeth as well. Any other comments or questions? From the committee, I'm looking for a motion then again to adopt Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Mayor Holder. And this is to adopt the guidelines.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Any deferred matters or additional business? I see none. I'm looking for adjournment. Councillor Cassidy, and seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. We are adjourned.